Chapter 4, Future Endeavors. Chapter Text. The salty sea air tickled Genevieve Sullivan's nose with every flap of her dragon's wings. Max crooned at his son Thunder, who twirled in the air nearby. His navy scales sparkled in the sunlight as he leveled out and shook his head, air plates flapping. "Enjoying the sunshine, big boy?" Genevieve called. Thunder pumped his wings harder, trying to outpace Maximum. Not to be outdone, her dragon growled and flapped harder, quickly pulling ahead. "Now boys, you're both pretty," Genevieve said, but quickly tightened the straps on legs. Just in case they decided to start an abrupt race, which was likely. It was rare for Thunder to join them on a flight without some sort of shenanigans taking place. Still, they'd been flying for eons and they must be getting close to Berk. A fast, direct flight to Berk was almost 4 hours, but if you took your time or took any side trips, it was easily 5 hours. Perhaps it wouldn't hurt to speed the trip along. And what better way to exact her plan than to mention Thunder's idol? "Thunder," Genevieve began, leaning close to meet Max's eye. "I heard Toothless is looking forward to seeing you." She had to bite back a laugh as Thunder's head snapped up and his eyes darted back and forth in search of the older dragon. "Yes, Toothless. In fact, since you'll likely be paired with a rider soon, the amount of time you'll have to learn from him is dwindling. We should hurry and get there before he gets too busy." With an excited yip, Thunder put on a burst of speed before tucking his wings and plunging into a steep nosedive. Max gave a long, long sigh through his nose. Genevieve laughed and patted his neck. "Come now, what's so bad about idolizing Toothless anyway? Or are you jealous that he has less time for his old man?" Growling, Max flipped into a sudden dive, cutting off her teasing laugh. Grabbing the saddle horn, Genevieve pulled herself low into the saddle, squinting to stop her eyes streaming as they dove. Her stomach swept up into her throat and she couldn't stop the thrilled cackle as they quickly caught up with Thunder. Max roared as they rushed past him, cackling with delight at his surprised blink. She barely heard his indignant growl but soon was beaming with challenge as he flapped to catch up. Waves collided on the surface not far below, spraying water into her face with cold prickles. Raising her head, a small series of black dots appeared on the horizon and she grinned. "Last one to Berk has to kiss Finn." Max chortled. She was fine with this, of course, but he was still not very affectionate toward her fiancé. Thunder, however, loved Finn almost as much as Toothless. If he wanted snuggles with his favorite boy, he'd have to come in second place. And Max, knowing that she'd get her kisses either way, rushed forward with an eager flap of his wings. Thunder growled indignantly and rushed to catch up. Grinning victoriously, Genevieve tightened her grip on the saddle. Perhaps 30 or 40 minutes of flying would quickly be shaved off at this rate. They were a pair of blue streaks in the sky, invisible to nearly all unless they knew what to look for. As Berk turned from a dot to a pillar of rock piercing the horizon, they began to see ships throughout the ocean. Fishing boats and sentries alike. A group of dragon riders paused mid-flight to scan their approach. Genevieve quickly raised her right arm where a white scarf had been tied tightly against her wrist. The riders nodded and waved, then proceeded on their scout. Genevieve lowered her arm and rescued her grip on the saddle as Max and Thunder put on a final burst of speed. Berk loomed closer now. Smoke wafted upward from the lit braziers of the twin Viking statues guarding the entrance to the harbor. What was a blur of wood and buildings and ships now cleared into the colors of the hatchery and the houses that lined the streets. Dragons and their riders flapped to and fro and paused to look up as they approached with an ear-splitting roar, both shockjaws nose to nose before the hatchery. It was impossible to tell who'd won, but then they shot over the village to a chorus of cheers and waves. Everyone seemed to know it was her and she grinned. Just like that, she was home. Home, she thought. That's what Berk was now. Home. Panting, Genevieve waved with a wiggle of her fingers and urged Max to slow. He was breathing hard beneath her but looked thrilled at the chase. Thunder was no different, though his blue-green eyes were already scanning the village. He hadn't forgotten her words about Toothless and Finn apparently. Sitting back, Genevieve untied the white scarf from her wrist and set it firmly inside her saddlebag. It was a little cumbersome, but it was their unspoken agreement across the allied villages. Anyone who wished to enter the realm of another territory must fly something white. It would be much easier than stopping every rider or ship that wished to enter and question them, though most ships were still checked. So far, after nearly 3 years of doing this, they'd been able to pick out anyone not flying white and ascertain their reasons for entering. In almost all cases, at least in Birkenjet, their reasons had been innocent. They forgot to fly something white. They were selling goods. They had a meeting with friends. The list went on, none of them with malicious intent. She wanted to think that it was all for naught and their enemies would know better than to pick a fight with any of them. So far, that seemed to be the case. But now she knew better. Now she'd seen some of the world on her adventures with Finn and understood why staying home and protecting it at all costs was so important to him. Flicking her gaze east, Genevieve felt a surge of protection in her chest. Yes, she knew better now. There was simply no way their enemies had given up. Not now. Thunder gave a sharp yip and then plunged down into the nearest street. A quick glance proved why, and she and Max laughed. Toothless could be clearly seen weaving through the streets with Hiccup not far behind. Max swept wide and then backflapped before landing in the square, kicking up dust and causing many Burkians to shield their eyes. The sun was hot in the otherwise cloudless sky. Now that she was no longer among the wind and sea, Genevieve noticed the scorching temperature and groaned. Do my eyes deceive me, or did the temperature just go up a few notches? Rolling her eyes, Genevieve turned to see her beloved striding up to them with a cheeky grin on his face. I'm not sure what your eyes have to do with temperature. Don't they? Finn's blue eyes flicked down to her body, wrapped in leathers and wool perfect for flying. Keep those eyes in their sockets, handsome. Genevieve warned, unbuckling her legs and standing in the saddle just as he'd once done long ago. Finn had to tip his head back to see her now. You might make the ladies blush. Because she'd noticed the few elderly ladies watching them from a nearby tea shop with knowing smirks. Cheeky little devils. They grinned and tittered, utterly unashamed. Oh please, those three. Nothing I could do would ever make them blush. Finn said, smirking. Isn't that right, Mrs. Eck? Indeed. However, there is very little by way of entertainment when you're as old as we are, Mrs. Eck said, her graying hair pulled back into a bun at her nape. A pair of needle sticks flashed in the sunlight. Nothing is more entertaining than young love. 'Tis true, said another. Betsy was her name, Genevieve recalled. And in a few weeks when you are wed, then we'll be watching very, very closely for any changes. Oh gods. Genevieve said, trying to ignore the rush of embarrassment that crawled through her insides. The old ladies laughed, but it was Finn's knowing smirk that had her blushing. Cheeky little devils, indeed. Ganging up on her, the lot of them. Grinning, Finn held up his hands to help her down. She accepted them and dismounted, careful to bend her knees as she touched the ground. She tried not to think about it. She was excited that their wedding was so close finally, and even though she was excited for all the changes married life would bring, she wasn't sure she was quite ready to have any babies just yet. Max sniffed and raised his head, probably looking for Zap. She's at the hatchery, Finn said, reaching out to scratch her dragon's nose. Max raised his head and tromped away, leaving a long trail in the dirt behind his tail. I'll never understand why he doesn't like me. He does like you, Genevieve said. He just doesn't adore you like everyone else. Like you? Finn asked. Well aware that the old ladies were still watching, Genevieve merely smiled. Turning to walk away though, she was careful that Finn's broad back was to them as she trailed her fingers across his abdomen and moved away. She glanced up at him through her lashes and trailed away, wandering through the busy street. Naturally he followed, and they left the smirking ladies behind to gossip. Many people greeted her as she walked, and she felt a rush of pleasure that had nothing to do with Finn. So much had changed in the last few years, and while it still felt new and fresh, no one questioned her presence here. These were her people. Someday soon she'd live here, and someday hopefully less soon she'd lead them with Finn. It was so exciting she couldn't help but take his hand and give it a tight squeeze. Finn laughed. What? I'm just so excited. Genevieve looked up at him and had to squint due to the sun being right behind his head. Why are you so tall? Wrapping an arm around her waist, he easily turned them so the sun was in his face. There, all the more light to see me better. Genevieve clicked her tongue. And here I thought you were being sweet. It's a buy one, get one free sort of deal today. Do the quips ever stop? Nope. Finn said matter-of-factly. I find they only grow in intensity when you're around. Not usually, Genevieve said, gazing up at him. You're in rare form today. She squinted, noting for the first time that he actually looked rather tired. Long night. Finn paused, no doubt realizing he'd been found out. Let's get a cold drink. Interested, Genevieve followed him to the nearest vendor. He bought 2 lemonades and led the way down a nearby side street cast in dark shadows. They both sighed in relief at the drop in temperature and slid on 2 crates. It's been an interesting week, Finn said, sipping his lemonade. Kind of all over the place actually. Oh. Tell me about it. Finn went quiet as he gently swirled the lemonade, the ice cubes inside rattling against the mug. Anna and Eric had a falling out. Genevieve choked on her lemonade and coughed. Finn quickly leaned forward and rubbed her back, but she waved him off. What? What do you mean? I think they've made up now, Finn said with a sigh. But apparently they've been having a rough time lately and she said some things. Gods, it was a mess. Finn launched into the tale, everything from finding Eric in the arena to allowing him to stay the night at his house to his relapse and then to everything the following day, ending with dropping Darren off in time for Eric to return home. Eric's arms were both wrapped but he promised me it wasn't more cuts, and he'd show me today what it meant. Finn said. But I didn't stay very long. She looked so miserable and, well, they both did. I haven't seen them yet today though, so hopefully they've fixed everything. Genevieve noted how stiff his shoulders were and took his hand. I'm sure they did. Nothing can break those two. Still, Finn said in a forced light tone. I didn't realize that was something people could fight over. Genevieve gave an amused huff. Unfortunately, yes. It's not uncommon, in fact. Well, he broke off, biting his lip and then finishing his lemonade. What? His blue eyes flicked to her face and held. I hope we don't have those problems. Genevieve felt a warmth spread through her chest and stomach at that, but she squeezed his hand. Only time will tell. One thing at a time, HM. That amused sparkle returned to his face but he said nothing, tipping a mouthful of ice into his mouth. Anyway, how was the meeting? Genevieve asked, noting with no small thrill how his fingers trailed to the ring on her left hand and lingered. Actually, it was different than usual. Alton and Johan's terror showed up all panicked with no letter, so my dad sent Snotlout and the twins to investigate. That was a couple days ago and they haven't come back yet, so, hopefully it was nothing. Genevieve frowned. It was very unusual for any terror to abandon its messengers. She wouldn't leave them unless she'd been forced to. I don't want to be negative, but it can't have been nothing. Finn pursed his lips. I know. Well, we'll see what they say. Genevieve said. Anything else? Well, he leaned back against the building with relaxed ease, a note of amusement returning to his voice. Apparently Ali sent my dad a letter telling him that someone has been stealing slaves. She told him to back off, assuming it was him, but he obviously told her to leave us out of it. Obviously. Genevieve said, sharing a smile. They've apparently dubbed this individual the Night Rider. Finn said, reaching out to wrap a long curl around his finger. Kinda catchy, huh? Sounds a bit pretentious. Genevieve replied, fighting a shudder as his calloused fingers slid around the curve of her neck and into her hair, his thumb caressing the skin beneath her jaw. Don't they know that if they give the person a name, they are only encouraged to keep up their vigilante ways? True. Finn murmured, leaning closer. To be honest, I think it's kinda sexy. Almost makes me wish it was you. You would? Genevieve said, grinning against his lips before he kissed her. The sound of footsteps sounded before they ground to a halt. Hey Jen, well that's awkward. Finn groaned as she pulled away, laughing. Hi Cliffy. Cliff had his hands folded behind his back as he looked up at the sky. The sun is quite bright today, wouldn't you say? Yes. Perhaps don't look straight at it, Genevieve warned. or else you'll go blind and be quite unable to set sights on that beautiful baby coming soon. Ah, that is a very valid point, Cliff said, dropping his eyes. As long as you're both decent. Finn choked. I don't recall stripping. You didn't have to. Good gods, boys. Genevieve said, raising a hand to her chest and trying her darndest to not blush. Calm yourselves. Married life has done a number on our local Cliffy. Local Cliffy? Cliff demanded. Does this mean there are more Cliffies in each village? I pray not, or the next convocations will be even worse than the last one. We can have a duel of the Cliffies to see who is the best. Genevieve sighed. Focus, now. Did you need me for something, Cliff? Oh right, Cliff said, his brown curls bouncing as he nodded. Are you coming to the party tonight? Of course. That's why I'm here. Excellent. Cliff clapped his hands and bounced on his heels excitedly. It's not the same as most baby showers. More of a housewarming / baby shower bonanza. Finn rolled his eyes. Will there be banana-themed desserts? Cliff gasped, eyes and mouth going wide. Oh, my gods, did you just? Did Fearless Finn just say a pun? I think we're stretching it, Genevieve said, giggling. It's a very bad pun, but a pun no less. And I hate myself. No, I'm impressed. Look how far we've come. Let's not. But your puns are so appealing. Cliff said, waggling his brows. Now that was low-hanging fruit, even for you. Jenny, no. You started it. Now you have to deal with the whole bunch. Finn groaned as she and Cliff cackled, pointing and slapping their knees. Don't you have a party to prepare for? Fine, I'll leave you alone. Cliff playfully wiped an eye. Yes, I do. I just wanted to see if Jennifer was coming after I saw her fly in, that's all. I'll see you guys tonight. He spun on his heel and promptly tripped on a barrel that he either forgot was there or didn't see. Oh gods, sorry. Finn raised his hands and shook his head as their friend flounced away. Why does he apologize to inanimate objects? I'd say he does it for a laugh, Genevieve said. Except he broke one of my teacups last year and nearly cried as he tried to put it back together, all while lamenting its demise. When he set a napkin over it and began looking for matches to light a funeral pyre, I wondered if he was actually being serious. What a nut. Smiling, Genevieve glanced over at him. Noted the ruddy, freckled skin and red hair and blue eyes dimmed in the shadows of the alley. Noticing her stare, he looked over and raised his brows. She shook her head and asked, any plans for your birthday? Finn shrugged. Just wedding plans. How many invitations are we at? Genevieve sighed. Well over 300 now. I helped my mother count more before I left this morning. He set his head back against the wall with a sigh. This is going to be huge. Normally he sounded so excited and now he looked nervous. This was normal, she reasoned, but... What's wrong? Nothing. Finn said. I just... He suddenly grinned and shook his head. I always knew my wedding would be huge, and I'm excited. But everywhere I go now I hear about it. The decorations, the food, the attendees. He paused. It's exciting, don't get me wrong, but, am I horrible for just wanting it to be over already? Genevieve gave him a gentle smile and took his hand. No. Not horrible. We've waited a long time. Too long, really. She snorted. Not more than once I've thought we should just elope and be done with the whole thing. Finn's brows shot up. You would do that? I would, but I do want my family to be there. And you're the heir to Burke, so. That doesn't matter. It does though. It sets a precedent. He barked a laugh. I couldn't care less what everyone else thinks. No, but if we have a daughter one day and she uses our own eloped marriage as an excuse to elope herself, would you like that? Genevieve grinned as he seemed to pause on the word daughter. You know I'm right. Finn blinked and sighed. Yeah, I know. Still, it would make it a hell of a lot easier. He suddenly smirked. Then we can really celebrate for my birthday. Oh, you are surely the naughtiest of them all. Not unless you hang all the rules and regulations and precedents and just marry me already. She noted his sly grin and fought the flurry of butterflies in her stomach. Ignoring this, she slid a hand up his chest to hook a finger in his collar, noting the way his breath shook slightly as she pulled him closer. She kissed him slowly, intentionally, noting how he went boneless even as his fingers rose up to twist in her hair. Her hand slowly slid from his collar to his chest where she could feel his heart pounding wildly and wilder still as her hand slid lower to his stomach. He broke away with a sharp inhale. Better stop that or you'll have your way with me in a rather public setting. Genevieve laughed, the sound huskier than usual. Would you complain if I did? Now who's naughty? Pecking his lips, Genevieve pulled away. She ignored the pit of frustration, reminding herself firmly that their wedding was only a few weeks away. Next week was his birthday and then preparations would begin. Burke would begin decorating the village. Visitors would begin arriving. The event was to be so largely attended that it would take nearly a week to prepare all the housing. It was almost as if they were hosting another convocation. Except this time, it had nothing to do with treaties and balancing budgets and economic welfare. This time, it was everything to do with them. Their wedding. Her marriage to fearless Finn Haddock. A burst of excitement rushed through her and she swiftly kissed him again. He laughed and slid an arm around her shoulders, easily pulling her into the warmth of his embrace. Despite the heat of the outdoors, she wrapped an arm around his waist and settled in. Together they watched the bustling activity of Burke just outside their little shelter from the sun, from prying eyes. Almost there. So close she could almost taste it. And the way his fingers slid across the skin of her arm, she knew he felt the same. Cliff Smedley remembered the worst day of his working life like it was yesterday. After Horst had retired, leaving Eric in charge of the leather shop and Cliff as his assistant, they'd had a rough time of it. It had been a bitterly cold day in November when orders were flooding in for the upcoming Snoggletog and tempers were running high. Due to the cold and their lacking organization, they'd been yelled at by not one, not two, but 3 irate customers. It had left them both in foul spirits and made the workday absolute torture to deal with. When Cliff had slipped with a pair of shears and cut himself rather badly, Eric had finally called it quits. Enough was enough for one day. He'd sent Cliff to his aunt's to get patched up and insisted on cleaning up the shop on his own before going home himself. Aunt Mara had given him stitches, which was a painful experience. He wasn't prone to injury like his friends, so the entire scenario had been painful and exhausting. There'd been a sparkle in his aunt's eyes and even a knowing look on Inga's face that he found rather irritating, but they shooed him out of the house without preamble. It was just as well. He wasn't in the mood to talk, which was really something. It was rare that he, Cliff Smedley, had a bad day. As soon as he arrived at the little house he and Taryn called home, he'd paused on the threshold at the sight of Taryn's red, tear-stained face. You too? Cliff sighed. She'd been utterly surprised and quickly wiped her face, but more tears seemed to fall despite her best attempts. Then she laughed. Cliff had blinked and said, I was about to offer you a hug but I'm not sure if you need one. Taryn approached and then noticed his wrapped hand. What happened to you? Cut myself. It was a bad day. I'm sorry. She quickly pulled him into a hug, which he gratefully accepted. He couldn't quite enjoy it though because she was shaking. Taryn, what's wrong? She pulled away and stared up at him, her eyes bright with excitement. I'm afraid, there's something in the oven. Cliff blinked, looking over her head and found the stone oven dark. The coals inside were black as pitch and yet there did seem to be something inside it. Reaching inside, he pulled out a roll. Well, Taryn said with a leading tone. Not a roll, exactly. Oh, it's a sweet bun. Cliff said, smiling at last. Is it for us to share or just me? Because I could definitely use a few sweet buns after this crappy day. Oh, I think one bun in the oven is quite enough to be dealing with for now. Cliff blinked, confused by her tone. She was staring up at him with an expectant expression, as if waiting for him to say something. Or, understand something, maybe. He set the sweet bun on the counter with a frown. A sweet bun, in the oven. Why would there be a bun in the oven? He blinked again. Wait. Wait, That meant something. Women said this all the time. Why, is there a bun in the oven? Cliff asked slowly. Taryn's smile grew teasing. Because you put it there, silly. I did not. Oh, you certainly did. Taryn, you're being really weird. Cliff said. Why would I put a bun in the? He broke off as he found her staring up at him with her hands on her stomach, a growing grin on her face. Wait. Cliff. Taryn whispered. I have something to tell you. His aunt's excited expression, Inga's knowing looks. Taryn was beaming and crying. There was a bun in the oven. Oh gods. Cliff said breathlessly, shoving his hands into his hair. Taryn. Cliff, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks again. I'm pregnant. His heart gave a wild flop in his chest. No, it couldn't be true. But no, it had to be true. She'd never make this up. She was pregnant. Taryn set her hands on his arms, breathing a choked sort of laugh. Did you hear me? Oh, he did. He most definitely did. Taryn was pregnant. Suddenly he was so happy he thought his heart would explode. Swallowing and fighting tears of his own, Cliff said hoarsely, "Hi pregnant, I'm Dad." And 8 months later, he could still hear Taryn's joyful cackle, still feel her arms around his neck as he'd picked her up and spun her around the house with mad giggles of his own. Looking at her now, it almost seemed like nothing had changed. She was still petite, still beautiful, still his Taryn. Facing away from him now, he almost couldn't tell anything had changed. That is, until she turned and he got a perfect view of her belly, small, round and beautiful. Adriana called him out on his doofy smiles on the regular, but he didn't care. She was utterly adorable. Adriana also called Taryn out on how unfair it was that she'd stayed small and petite during her pregnancy. Cliff and Eric had learned more than a few things than they cared to in the last few months as the women compared details of their pregnancies. Oh, how things had changed. Anytime anyone said the words son, daughter, or baby, Cliff's insides would effectively turn to goo. The fact that he was soon to become a father was utterly mind-boggling. He was no less excited though. His little family was soon to grow from 2 to 3, and he couldn't be more excited to meet his baby boy or baby girl. Now that they'd finally settled into their new house set on the hillside on the eastern side of Burke, they were starting to get things in order. The baby room was all set up, quickly filling with all manner of things they needed. Probably more than they needed if he was honest. Adriana and Eric had quickly given them advice on what sorts of things to stock up on. Toys were nice, but it would be some time before their little one would be able to play with them. So cleaning clothes, burpee rags, blankets, these things could never be in short supply. And as Cliff had been around much of the time that Darren was an infant, he was quite inclined to agree. Now Cliff glanced around their new house bustling with activity for their housewarming party and baby shower. Both sets of parents were there, all four talking excitedly. Hiccup and Astrid, as well as Finn and Genevieve, Adriana and Eric, Thorin and Rosie, Inga, Helga, Evan and Morgan, Grandma Ingerman, and more. He'd never seen his house so packed full of people. The only one who was missing was Alton, who was supposed to come home soon for Finn and Genevieve's wedding. When, he wasn't exactly sure. It was difficult to keep up with the traders' schedule, distant as they were. Besides, most of Alton's letters went to Inga. Inga herself was sitting alone in a chair nearby, her cup of lemonade untouched beside her. Her blue eyes were like glaciers, cold and distant. A far cry from the teasing grins she'd given them a few days ago as she'd given them instructions for the birth. Cliff sipped his own lemonade as he took a seat next to her. "Hey, you okay?" Inga blinked, her dark mood disappearing almost instantly. "Oh hey. Yeah, I'm alright. Just thinking." "About what?" Inga pursed her lips. "It's nothing. Don't worry about it." Cliff raised a brow. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Inga said, eyes level across the room. "This is a party after all. Nothing's going to break the happy mood, not even me." Implying there was something wrong. He gave a swift look across the room before she looked away and found Finn's eyes darting to his glass. Cliff frowned. They were hiding something then, if Finn was eyeballing her and she was changing the subject. Inga, what's... Tarin. Inga launched up from her seat as his wife approached wearing a white dress. You look gorgeous. Oh thanks, Inga. Tarin said in surprise. It wasn't every day Inga was so jovial. I'm curious, have you heard from Alton? Inga went still, her smile freezing on her face. Cliff watched as her eyes flicked to Finn, still listening nearby, and darted back to Tarin. No, I haven't. She sounded slightly breathless, which only made him wonder. Sorry. Tarin shrugged. It's alright, I just wondered. Maybe they're finishing up their last bits of business before coming home. They'd better hurry up or they'll be late for the wedding. Yeah. Inga said. It was so strange, Cliff thought. He wanted to ask more questions but suddenly Darin toddled into the group, pushing through the sea of legs and effectively providing Inga with a distraction, considering he had a tall glass of lemonade in his hands. Oh, careful. Inga quickly disappeared after the toddler. Cliff frowned. She seemed far too eager to escape their questioning. A pair of fingers brushed through his hair and he looked up at Tarin, who was giving him a concerned smile. Are you okay? Yeah. Just thinking. Cliff turned his face to kiss her palm and then leaned forward to kiss her belly. Adulting is the worst because I'm always looking for problems now, but it has its benefits. Tarin laughed deep in her throat and turned away as another guest called her name. Cliff watched her go with a smile, watching her slight waddle with an amused grin. His gaze settled on Eric and Adriana sitting at a table nearby, talking quietly. Both of them looked tired but her hand was in his, her fingers tracing over. Cliff blinked. His bestest bra had gotten tattoos. And he didn't care to share the news. Excuse me, Cliff said, promptly shoving himself into the empty space between them moments later and pulling up a chair. When, exactly, were you going to tell me the happy news? They blinked in surprise. What news? Adriana asked carefully. Cliff grabbed Eric's wrist, belatedly realizing his sharp wince, and flipped it over. What is this? Since when did you get so modern? He raised a brow. Also, what does Verses mean? Veritas. Eric said with a slow smile. Truth. Ha. Likely story. It probably says lies, because what else would it be other than a ruse so that you remember to not tell your Cliffy all of life's greatest updates? I only got them yesterday. Aha, likely story. Cliff sat back with a mock scowl and dramatically sipped his lemonade. It burned on the way down and he choked. Finn, got anything stronger? Finn paused in his nearby talk with Genevieve and Helga. Why do you always go to me for the stronger drinks? I'm not a drunk. I don't carry it wherever I go. Yes, but you have a stash nearby, no? You're about to be a parent, if I may remind you. Exactly. So I need to brood over my losses before my time runs out. Finn rolled his eyes and returned to his conversation with Helga and Genevieve, both of whom were grinning in amusement. Adriana patted Cliff's arm. I am so sorry we didn't think to tell you earlier. If we had another form of communication other than face-to-face or terramail, perhaps we would have told you instantly. Alas, we're stuck in the 12th century. Eric mused with a long-suffering sigh. Life sucks. Laugh all you want, Cliff said with a sniff as they chuckled. But I'm still mad at you. The next time I get tattoos, I'll invite you along. Adriana frowned. But I thought you said you weren't going to get any more. She belatedly noticed Eric slicing a hand across his throat. I mean. Cliff clicked his tongue. What is happening? Secrets and lies. Lies and utter deceit. I think I need new friends. Oh please, you couldn't abandon us if you tried. Eric said. Who else will give you baby advice? Well, you know what they say. Cliff said, slurping his lemonade again and nearly inhaling ice. Experience is the best teacher. Here, here. Genevieve said, taking a seat across from them. We're heading to Finn's after the party if anyone wants to come. We're trying to figure out how to organize the furniture. It's already organized, woman. Finn said, sliding into the seat beside her with a sly smile. I keep telling you. And I'm just saying your way of organizing a house leaves something to be desired. Who wants to walk into the house to walk directly into a couch? Not unless you're really good at parkour. Cliff raised a glass. Eric snorted. What do you know about parkour? I'm pliable as a wet noodle. Course I know all about parkour. They all rolled their eyes, snickering. Cliff was, of course, totally joking. He knew better than anyone that he was a klutz. A very real fact that made him nervous, considering he was about to become a parent. What if he hurt his new baby because wasn't steady on his feet on a good day without holding anything precious that relied on him for safekeeping and protection? Suddenly nervous, he set his lemonade down and found Tarin talking to Helga. She was the most precious thing to him, and soon he would have two precious beings in his life. Now he knew how Eric and Adriana felt. His friend seemed to sense his change in mood because Adriana's hand suddenly squeezed his. Don't worry. You can do this. You can't possibly be as terrified as I was. Not that we're minimizing your fear. Eric added quickly. Right. Sorry. Cliff shook his head and gave her a grateful smile. No, it's okay. Sometimes I wonder if we're really ready. You won't be, Genevieve said, drawing his attention. But you will be. You've got all of us here to help you. Touched, Cliff gave them all a smile. Thanks. Still, he wondered. But I wonder, Cliff said, turning to Finn. What it's like to be an uncle. Surely Alton feels just as nervous as you did. He didn't really care for the answer to the question, just as he knew Finn saw right through it. By the way Finn held eye contact and then suddenly looked at Genevieve, and the silence of the others, he knew something was up. What's going on? Cliff asked quietly. Nothing. Finn said. Your party is apparently a distraction. Cliff said, leaning forward. Inga was acting weird and I can tell you're holding something back. What's going on? Eric exhaled slowly. Cliff, we don't have a definitive answer to that question yet. Cliff stared at him. What are you talking about? What are you not telling us? This isn't the time for this conversation, Genevieve said gently. Not while you have guests. No, apparently it's not the time until the rest of you deem it appropriate. The orders came from my dad. Finn said firmly but clearly, doing his best to keep his voice down. We don't want to cause you or Tarin or her parents to panic when everything could be perfectly fine. Why wouldn't it be? Cliff asked, his heart rate picking up speed. Genevieve took Finn's hand and gave him a warning look. Eric raised a hand. Calm down. If you want to know, then let's go outside and I'll tell you. But really, we don't want to cause a scene and ruin your party. Biting his tongue, Cliff took a deep breath through his nose and let it out. If they wanted that so much, they weren't doing a very good job of keeping their suspicious behavior to themselves. Fine. Eric led the way to the door and Cliff followed him outside. Though they did their best to be inconspicuous, he still felt Tarin's eyes on him as they slipped out the door. The snores of Edna Louise Sacramento III echoed from inside the barn as Eric led him around the back of the house where they had little chance of being disturbed. Still, the sounds of laughter could still be heard as they finally stopped at the back and Eric paused. Alton's Tara Maybell showed up at the healers, Eric said, crossing his arms over his chest. She didn't have a letter and she was panicking. Inga took her to Hiccup and he agreed it looked fishy, so he sent Snotlout and the Thorsten twins to check on him and Johan. Cliff's mind whirled with the information. When was this? 2 days ago. And when the hell was everyone going to tell us? We didn't want all of you to panic, as Finn said. Eric said calmly. Hiccup and Astrid agreed that was best. You know, that's the crappy thing about people who give the orders. Cliff snapped. They always think they know best. Why should you and the Brands worry when it might be nothing? Because they've already lost a son. Cliff nearly shouted. Eric stiffened. Cliff huffed, remembering who he was talking to, what had happened to Kurt. Who'd tried to run inside that burning building to save him and his own sister. I'm not blaming you, Cliff said, trying to reel in his frustration. But this is my wife's brother we're talking about. She's already had to watch her father light the pyre of one brother. Cliff, We don't know anything is wrong. Eric pleaded, dropping his arms. I get it. We wouldn't want Taryn to go into labor early. Stop. You're overthinking it, and gods know you can't help it. Cliff said. But Taryn and Clyde and Joan, they'd want to know. So they can pray, so they can hope, not be given bad news. Not like that. Trust me, I would know what's best for them, and hiding it. Waiting for days to even hear about it. That's not helping anything. Even if it was just a scuffle or something and they are fine now, how do you think they'd feel if they found out there was this big secret mission to check on them? I know. I'm not disagreeing with you. Then you won't mind when I tell my family what's going on. Eric exhaled and shook his head. No, I don't. Believe me, I get it. Cliff shook his head, still fuming. I just don't understand why you of all people decided to hide this from me. I didn't decide. I had other things going on besides, I was distracted. How convenient. Eric's expression turned guarded. I'm not going to fight with you about it. We all do what's best for our families and I wouldn't expect you to do any differently. If you want to be upset about what was decided, fine. But please don't take it out on me. As a quiet afterthought, he added, I've had a hard enough week without you yelling at me, too. Instantly Cliff felt guilty. He sighed and rubbed his face. Sorry. I don't like secrets. Not like this. Don't apologize. Eric said firmly. I'd feel the same. Cliff observed his friend's distant expression, his tired eyes and bandaged arm. Are you all right? Eric met his eyes and seemed to think through the question. I'm getting there. He felt sad, suddenly. Sad that it felt different. That they'd both grown up in the last few years and moved on with their married lives with their own problems and situations and stress and happiness. Most of the time it was like nothing ever changed, and yet it wasn't the same. They used to tell each other everything and now they didn't. To his surprise, his eyes suddenly burned. Suddenly he missed the days when they were kids and they could tear up the village without worrying about caring for a house and bringing in enough money to put food on the table. Even though they still worked together and saw each other almost every day, it wasn't the same. Eric was on the council and knew things about their village and the archipelago that he didn't. Normally he didn't care, but his all of his friends really, played important roles in protecting their village. And he was, just Cliff. He was happy to be a husband and soon a father. He had no doubts about that. But it was strange. He'd never felt set apart from Eric and Finn and Thorin and Evan before. Even Adriana and Genevieve had their roles. Somehow he felt like he wasn't doing his part. Good for a laugh, not much else. They didn't even feel the need to inform him about the situation with his brother-in-law. Why would they tell him anything else? I can't read that frustration. Eric said distantly. What are you thinking? Cliff shook his head. Everything's different now. We have our families, our own lives really. It just feels like something's changed between us. Maybe I'm just now realizing it, but it feels like there's a gap here. He gestured to the space between them. And I don't know if it was just life or kids or what, but suddenly it feels different. Eric's expression was downcast. It doesn't have to be. Maybe it'll just be harder now that we're older, but it doesn't have to be different. Maybe. They were quiet for a long moment. He wasn't sure what else to say. Then Eric smiled. Those pregnancy hormones, huh? Cliff chuckled and rubbed his face. They're the worst. I think I stress eat more than Taryn. After a moment, he asked, did you figure out what was going on with Anna? Eric exhaled a long breath. Yeah. I'll tell you about it at work tomorrow though. Otherwise we'll both be emotionally drained and your party isn't over yet. Okay. And I'll tell you what we find out when the twins and Snotlout come back. Eric promised. I don't enjoy hiding things from people, you know. But we were given orders. I get it. Just don't hold back the truth, whatever it might be. It could be nothing. Cliff didn't reply. He'd do his best to not overthink the entire scenario, but it didn't feel right. This wasn't like Alton. A pair of footsteps approached and a moment later Adriana appeared, looking nervous. "They are bringing out cake." "Perfect." Cliff clapped his hands together and rubbed them, but the excitement felt forced. "I could use a slice of cake." Adriana's green eyes narrowed in concern, but he merely patted Eric's arm and led the way inside. He plastered a smile worthy of the Smedley name onto his face, ready to indulge in sugary delights and enjoy the rest of the shower with his Taryn. But a dark cloud was still brewing over his head. He was worried about Alton. He hoped Eric had told him everything, that there wasn't more that he'd withheld. But more than anything he wondered if his friends actually trusted him as much as they claimed. If he'd somehow taken second place to their priorities. If he really meant as much to them as they claimed. The thought was nearly enough to corrupt his smile, his laugh, his joy. Only Taryn seemed to notice his change of mood. Only she seemed able to tell whether his laughs and obnoxious jokes were either genuine or forced. She took his hand and gave him a kind smile. She understood, even if she didn't know what was happening yet. What was on his mind and in his heart. That her brother was possibly missing. But he was enough here, for her. He didn't need to prove himself to her or be on the council to be good for her. She was all he really needed. He just hoped that was enough to forget everything else. Genevieve pushed open the door to Finn's house, soon to be their house, and gestured everyone inside. Eric and Adriana were quick to follow Darren, who ran straight to a box of toys under the stairs. Cliff and Taryn followed hand in hand, looking around at the furnishings and boxes strewn throughout the living room. Her belongings she'd yet to unpack. Finn brought up the rear and closed the door. Despite the lateness of the hour, Taryn had insisted on coming. Because she was due soon, she declared that her nights of fun were soon coming to a close, and she had enough energy to survive a tour of the house. Besides, she'd added upon throwing a shawl over her shoulders and throwing Cliff a cheeky grin. "I have a husband to keep me warm all night." Finn's cough was direct enough, but the rest of them didn't care. "It always amazes me," Adriana said. "How much stuff you don't realize you have until it's time to move it all." Taryn groaned. "Yes. Indeed, but imagine having it flown or delivered by ship from another island entirely." Genevieve said, raising her brows. "We still have so much to move. I feel bad you have to live with all these boxes." Finn waved her words off as he poured water into a kettle, warming her heart at how well he knew her. She'd just considered making some tea. "It is a sign of good things to come. Mainly, our impending nuptials." "Whoa," Finnegan using big boy words. Adriana said, earning herself a smile from her husband. "What's next?" "I can think of a few," Finn said. "How about bothersome?" "Aggravating." "Vexatious is a particularly handsome word," Genevieve said, nodding the girls toward the washroom. "Jenny, that one is too big for my small brain. We'll grow your brainceps one day at a time. Right, Cliffy?" Cliff merely nodded as Taryn followed her. Genevieve thought it was strange how he didn't have a comeback, but it was rather late. And he was probably rather stressed. She pushed it from her mind and gestured to the washroom. "I haven't been here in an age," Adriana said. Naturally Benin thought it was much too big, but Daddy insisted on giving him a proper washroom. "Too right," Taryn said. "Everyone should have access to one. My parents' house doesn't have one, and the small house we used to live in has a tiny one. I remember it well, that old broom closet," Adriana said with a nod. "So I'm grateful for the one we were able to build in the new house. It's bigger than mine," Adriana said. Genevieve nodded in agreement. "I was surprised as well. It is quite large, though I suppose having a storage pantry in there was suitable. I like having it out of the way," Taryn said. "Less clutter in the actual kitchen." Besides, she leaned in with a conspiratorial grin, her hands on her belly. "This is only the first Smedley baby to come. We'll need a big washroom for all that laundry." They all giggled, though Adriana's was muted slightly. "A dozen Smedley babies sounds wonderful." Taryn beamed. Adriana quickly returned her attention to the task at hand. Genevieve kept a close eye on her, but was thoroughly distracted when she said, "This tub needs replacing though, General, you'll need a bigger one." Genevieve asked, observing the one built into the center of the room. Why? Adriana smirked as she met Taryn's eye and then hers. You'll want one big enough for two, of course. Oh dear. Genevieve said, ignoring the rush in her stomach at that. Her face flushed as they both cackled madly. You girls are worse than the boys. Boys are crass, Taryn said. Girls are realistic. Adriana grinned. Besides, I want nieces and nephews post-haste. So we have 3 weeks to get this place in order. Genevieve cleared her throat. Were you both teased so mercilessly before you got married? Taryn thought for a moment. I don't remember. Nor I. Adriana said. But as Cliffy said earlier, experience is the best teacher. Genevieve didn't want to entertain such thoughts. And yet, try as she might, she couldn't quite hold off the small grin. The girl snickered at her side and she promptly ran a hand through her curls. You two are wee devils. Distracted by the sound of moving furniture, Genevieve promptly left the girls to investigate. Finn and Cliff were moving the couch to another side of the living room while Eric gave directions. She almost asked why Cliff had been tasked with moving furniture, clumsy as he was, instead of Eric, but quickly held her tongue at the sight of his wrist still wrapped a few inches above the new tattoo. Left, Cliff. Left. My left or your left? We're facing the same direction. No, we're not. My left is this way. Cliff did an awkward sort of crab walk toward the far wall as Finn stood across from him with pursed lips, the couch between them. Your left is this way. He began dragging the couch backward, but unfortunately Finn wasn't paying attention and was nearly dragged off his feet. Whoa. KF. The couch fell to the ground with a loud crash, setting Genevieve's teeth on edge. A small shriek sounded from the washroom and soon Adriana and Taryn appeared in the doorway, their brows raised. Taryn's hands were fast over her heaving chest. I said be careful. Eric said. Too late. Cliff said, throwing up his hands. He promptly flopped onto the couch with a huff. I quit. Jen, the couch is staying here. In an awkwardly diagonal position in the center of the room. Sure. It will be off-kilter for everyone else, but you'll get used to it quick enough. Remember what I said earlier. Parkour. Finn sighed. Up, you lazy bag of bones. Cliff opened his mouth to retort but was soon deposited onto the floor as Finn angled the couch and hauled it across the room himself. You'll scuff the floors. Genevieve cried, rushing forward to grab the other end. Oh no, Finn said, raising a brow as she raised the other half. It's almost like they're meant to be touched. Walked on and such, yes, Genevieve said, following his lead to the wall. But deliberately scuffing them when it will show later we'll have to pay to have someone fix it. How about we request a nice rug for Snoggletog instead? How about we just be nice to the things we have? Jenny, it's a flaw. Genevieve huffed. Never mind. She turned and found their friends all sharing knowing smirks. If someone says one word about our first fight in our new home, I will slay you all. Adriana promptly closed her mouth as Cliff raised his hands, still seated on the floor. Mama, look what I found. Darren's voice suddenly cut through the silence from the top of the stairs, a metal helmet on his head. They all cooed at how cute he was with the very large helmet with tall curved horns on his head. His little hands could hardly keep it upright as he came down the stairs. Wow, that's a big helmet. Adriana said. Where did you? Her words were cut off in a sharp gasp as Darren tripped, unable to clearly see the stairs. Half of them started forward as he nearly toppled down, but Eric got there first. His hands caught him around the middle long before he fell too far and quickly scooped him up. The helmet clattered to the floor and they all breathed a quick sigh of relief, but it was all enough to make Darren's lips tremble. It's okay. Eric said, holding him close. I've got you. Sighing, Adriana brushed his hair back. Daddy saved you. But you have to be careful. Finn exhaled a long breath. Good catch. Darren seemed quite content in Eric's arms after his small bout with gravity and dropped his face onto his daddy's shoulder. Well, Taryn said. Is there anything else you wanted help with? No, that was pretty much it. Genevieve said. We'll have everyone over after things really get settled in. Finn nodded in agreement. Okay. I think it's time then. Taryn said to Cliff. It's a bit of a walk back and I'll be tired by the time we get there. We should go, too, Eric said, gesturing with his eyes how Darren hadn't moved his cheek from its restful spot on his shoulder. He's also getting tired. Yeah. Adriana agreed. Genevieve and Finn followed their friends to the door and thanked them for coming, even though it had only been for a short visit. Still, Taryn gave her a wink as she took Cliff's hand and left, careful of the narrow porch steps. The Larsons also bid them goodbye and soon disappeared into the night, quiet as specters. Finn made a dissatisfied noise and turned away. What? Genevieve asked, shutting the door. It still feels off, that's all. They are both still acting weird. I didn't think so. Genevieve said. Maybe they are just lacking confidence right now. That's what I mean. Finn huffed and dropped onto the couch. It just feels weird. Well, it probably feels less weird for you than it does for them. Genevieve said softly. They are working through it. I guess. Genevieve dropped her hands onto his shoulders and leaned down to meet his eyes. You're cute when you care. Hey, I always care. A fact that most people are unaware of and that I love most about you. The smile she wanted to see finally emerged as he reached up to tug on a long curl. What did you want to show me? Oh. Genevieve leaped back and ran to the door where she'd hung up a large bag. I'm glad you remembered. I'll be here for a few days, of course, but I wanted to show you today. Suddenly nervous, she pulled out a large folded piece of cloth. I made this for you. Well, for us really. For this place. Finn sat forward, his blue eyes flicking over the tasseled edges of red and blue material. What is it? Excited, Genevieve turned it toward herself and began to unfold it. Making sure it was facing the right way up, she turned it around so he could see the tapestry she'd been making for the better part of the last 2 years. Finn's mouth dropped open. Jenny, you made that? Yeah, Genevieve breathed, holding it to the side so she could look it over herself. It's customary for a Jatan bride to give her future husband a tapestry for their home. I toyed with the idea of not making one, mostly because it's a lot of work and for so long I had no idea what to make, but, suddenly one day I had a picture in my head of exactly what I wanted to make. And here it is. It was massive, nearly 5 feet long and 3 feet wide. Red and gold and blue threads woven together to create a picture, each thread symbolizing something about them. The red represented him and his fearlessness, the gold represented her light, though she was loath to admit it. It had been her mother's idea, not just to make the tapestry for him, but to make it about them, which of course included herself. She was his light, so she should add something light. The 2 blue dragons bound in a never-ending circle around 2 green and brown islands in the center. 2 homes. 2 dragons. 2 people. 1 tapestry. And stitched along the edges, a single word that she knew meant more to him than anything. Fortis. To the love she'd found, with him, for him. That she'd have with him. To have in their home for every moment of every day, as a reminder of the promises they would make to each other. For every good day. Every bad day. And every day between. Finn's eyes were bright as he stood and took the edges in his hands. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he whispered, I don't deserve you. Genevieve folded her hands atop of his, effectively crumpling the tapestry, but she didn't care. Stop. Yes, you do. How long? Don't worry about that. That's not the point. No, but he suddenly laughed. Gods, this had to take months to make. I feel like I should. If you say you think you should pay me, I will slap you. Genevieve said with raised brows, but she couldn't quite help the grin as he quickly closed his mouth. Then she leaned up on tiptoes and whispered, you can pay me in other ways someday. He smirked and brushed her hair back. Maybe with those babies everyone keeps talking about. Oh gods. Genevieve dropped her forehead onto his chest, smothering her laugh. They're all more eager than we are, I think. Yeah, it's kinda weird actually. Finn said, sliding his arms around her back. He was so warm, so tall and comforting, she couldn't help the sigh. I think I tell at least 3 people a day to get their mind out of the gutter. It's a sign that Jatan traditions need to go down the tubes. Genevieve sighed again, this time with mute frustration. Hey. Genevieve turned her face up and froze when his hand slid around to cup her face. Frustrating as it is, we can make it a few more weeks. Finn said, kissing her forehead and lingering. She closed her eyes, savoring him. And then he added, and she opened her eyes in time to see his smirk. You can have me anytime. He kissed her nose next, then her lips. And anywhere you wish. She swallowed hard, her heart flapping wildly in her chest. Remember when I said we should just elope earlier? Surprise cut through the desire on his face. Jen. I'm serious. Genevieve said. Because I'll gladly have you tonight if you want. I won't have to stay at your parents' house, but we can get married tonight and we can still have the ceremony in 3 weeks. And, how would we explain to my parents when we knock on the door that we want them to marry us tonight? Finn asked. That would be, kind of awkward. We can go to Braun. We'll ask Kara. And then both our parents won't be there. Plus we wouldn't have witnesses. Maybe we could ask Rain and her husband. Finn opened and closed his mouth for a few seconds. Gods. He finally laughed. You're serious? Very serious. But you wanted your family here. I did. I do. Genevieve huffed, looking down at the tapestry still in her hands. I should have waited. For what? To give you this. I was supposed to wait until the wedding night to give you this, according to tradition. Genevieve huffed again. But I was so excited that I ignored that, because it's just a stupid tradition anyway. Now I wonder if that tradition isn't in place for a reason, to keep people from making rash choices. We've been waiting almost 3 years. Finn said carefully. It makes sense why we'd be tempted to make rash choices, and ignoring an old tradition made by difficult old men centuries ago isn't a bad thing. Maybe. Genevieve said, hating the way her eyes burned. But it's made me discontent. Jenny. Finn's voice held a note of admonishment in it. There's nothing wrong with wanting to get married now. You don't have to feel bad about being discontent, not after all this time. But you don't think we should just get married tonight? Of course I want to. That doesn't answer my question, Finn. You don't think we should? Finn took a deep breath and let it out. I want to. More than anything. If it was up to me we'd have been married 1.5 years ago. But after all this time I feel like, if we were to just quit now, 3 weeks away. I'd feel like I betrayed our parents or something, after everything they've done, after everything we've done to stick to their rules. Genevieve nodded. And making them happy is more important. No. Finn sighed and looked away. He looked so torn and she knew why. He wanted to please everyone, to do the right thing. But she was so tired of waiting and doing the right thing. It wasn't just sex, that much she knew. That was definitely part of it, but it was the traveling the long distance to see each other, the stress he carried on his shoulders every day, the eyes of their parents and others, the desire for their new life to begin. She was ready to move to Berk today. She'd been ready to move to Berk for months, in fact. For a time she'd been grateful for the wait so she could get her affairs in order. She'd done everything her parents required, the ceremonies and banquets and prayers and all the Ladida her culture required. But she was ready. In her soul she'd been ready since the day he proposed. Since before that really. She was ready to be his wife and prepare to be the future chiefess of Berk. It wasn't bad to want these things, but she wouldn't force him. He was right. It was only 3 more weeks. They could make it. Maybe her exhaustion from the busy day was just making her more emotional. Maybe all the constant teasing and comments were making matters more difficult. He wanted to be selfish. She wanted to be selfish. Maybe it wasn't wrong. But at the heart of it, he knew there was always a cost to selfishness, even something as trivial as upsetting their parents for missing their marriage, especially when Hiccup and Kiev were both set to play parts in their wedding, to make it special. It just wasn't worth it. And she knew that was why he'd hesitated. Sniffing, she held up the tapestry. Let's find somewhere to hang it for now. Finn met her eyes and seemed to read her expression for a long, long moment. Then nodded. They worked in silence to find a spot and clear a space so they could hang it. They finally settled on a spot over the fireplace where it would be seen by anyone who came in. Finn stood on a chair to hang it up, the clatter of the nail and hammer loud in the otherwise quiet room. As he stepped down and took a spot next to her, they looked up at it hanging there with a critical eye. Then he nodded. It's perfect. He looked down at her, still looking sad. She hated that he looked like that. She hated that she felt like that. Jenny. I'm sorry, she whispered. I ruined the moment. Finn gave her a small smile and slid an arm around her waist before pulling her closer. You could never ruin anything. Kiss me. Genevieve whispered. Make me feel something other than this, sadness. Finn's smile was full of nothing but understanding, even as he said, so you're essentially asking me to kiss it better. Despite the temptation to smile and laugh, she fought against both. If you can find it in yourself to do so. As my lady commands. Finn whispered before capturing her mouth with his and sliding his arms around her waist. Genevieve stood on tiptoes and pushed her hands through his hair. Though it was meant to be a single kiss, it only made her want more. He seemed to know it too, because even though his breath grew short, he kept his hands firmly on her back, instead of letting them roam like he usually did. Slowly he pulled away, his nose beside hers. It'll be worth it, he whispered. Every minute of every hour of every day will have been worth it. I promise. Touched and feeling more hopeful than before, she wrapped her arms around his neck and squeezed him tight. I know. Finn seemed to breathe her in, nose buried in the hair at her neck. 3 weeks and you can ravish me from sunup till sundown. Genevieve snorted and pinched his shoulders. Or sundown to sunup, if you prefer. Ha! Finn said, slowly setting her down. We'd better go before we think of more naughty ideas. I blame Adriana. Finn paused in grabbing her jacket from the hook. What's Anna got to do with this? As Genevieve shoved her arms into the sleeves, she smirked at the tub through the open door of the washroom across the house. Oh, I'll tell you later. The Larson house was eerily silent and dark. Seeing as it was the middle of the night, this was perfectly normal. Except Adriana couldn't sleep. She'd been lying wide awake, blinking in the darkness, for what felt like hours. It couldn't have been that long. And though Eric was silent as the grave beside her, she had a feeling he was just as wide awake. They'd discussed things. Spent the night and entire day together. Gone to the Smedleys' party and Finn's house. And yet things still felt off. Maybe it would just take time for things to feel normal again. But with the weight on her heart, she couldn't help but feel like she was kidding herself. He said it wasn't her fault that he'd hurt himself, but that couldn't be true. At the heart of it, she'd said some horrible things to him. At the heart of it, she still doubted. Maybe the gods knew how horrible and spiteful she was inside. They knew her character and decided after all these years of her doubts and poor behaviors, this was to be her punishment. She wanted more children and it just wasn't meant to be. Perhaps it was never Eric's fault at all. Maybe it was hers. She didn't deserve him. A pang went through her chest at that. No, maybe she didn't. Maybe she never had. She looked down through the darkness to the slight glimmer of silver and diamond on her left hand. The ring he'd made her was as beautiful as it had been the day he proposed. And yet staring down at it, she felt like she didn't deserve it. After everything he'd ever done for her, every bit of compassion and kindness and friendship, she'd rattled him down to his very foundations. Made him doubt everything. Their marriage. His relationship with his son. Their future. Everything. The sheets hissed as Eric turned over and suddenly his chest was pressed to her back, his arm sliding around her waist. For a moment she thought that maybe he really had been asleep after all. And then he spoke. What are you thinking about? Adriana said nothing. Annie, I know you're awake. You're tense as a board. His fingers skimmed her wrist. Talk to me. She closed her eyes and sighed. I don't know what to say. He was silent for a long minute while his thumb traced her fingers in the dark. A thought for a thought then. I'll go first. He was quiet again, which only confirmed her suspicions that he'd also been lying awake, plagued by too many thoughts. I'm frustrated with myself for making it all about me. Adriana frowned. You have a right to have feelings. Yes. But because we were so focused on me, we didn't even talk about why we fell out in the first place. True. Maybe that was why she felt so unsettled. Maybe there was still too much left unsaid between them. Your turn. Adriana shook her head, watching as his fingers strayed to the ring on her left hand, almost like he could read her mind. Sometimes I think you deserve better. I deserve nothing. The fact that you chose a screw-up like me at all is a miracle. I'm the screw-up, not you. His arm slid around her waist to cradle her closer. That's not true. No. Adriana asked. You were the first one, you know. The first one to what? To want more kids. Eric breathed a small laugh. I don't think that's necessarily true. Maybe I vocalized it first, but you've always wanted kids. A lump began to form in her throat. She swallowed, but it did little to help. I have, but I wanted to give you what you wanted so badly, and maybe I can't. Annie, come here. Turn around. Though she wanted to be stubborn, he sat up to allow her space to turn. Sniffing, she turned onto her back so she could look up at him. All I ever wanted was you. Eric said, his voice both soft and pleading. The kids will come, and if they don't, then what am I left with? You. Oh, Adriana said, choking on her tears slightly. How flattering. Gods, woman. It's a compliment. I know. Sorry. Eric sighed, leaning on his elbow above her. You know the day of our fight, when I was still at work, Cliff and I were talking about you. Adriana sniffed. Yeah. Yeah. We were trying to puzzle out why you were acting so weird after going to Mara's. Eric's eyes lowered to her shoulder or maybe the pillow beneath it. He guessed you might be pregnant. Adriana blinked, trying to ignore the raw emotion that rose in her chest. And for a second, I was. Eric chewed his lip and shook his head. So caught off guard and excited and hopeful that I could hardly breathe. But I made myself calm down, just in case it wasn't that, because... He broke off. Because you didn't want to be disappointed? Adriana asked, her voice thick. Eric said nothing. She wiped her face, though the tears were falling fast now. All I've wanted is to give you that happiness. I'm sorry. No, Annie, that's not. Eric took a deep breath and let it out. I'm not disappointed in you. You don't have to apologize to me for not giving me what I wanted. It's not about giving me anything. This is something we're meant to share. It's not the same as a birthday present or Snoggletog present. Adriana choked on a sudden giggle, mortified at how slobbery and blubbery it sounded. Or both. Or both. Eric amended, wagging his head back and forth at her with a grin, but it didn't last as she quickly wiped her face on the blankets. But this is something that's ours to share. It's not about expectations. This was why I was afraid to tell you that I wanted more kids after Darren was born. Because I didn't want you to think I expected anything from you. No, and I never thought you did. Adriana said quickly. I wanted more, too. I wanted them with you. More than anything. I guess after so long, I just got so frustrated that I lost sight of what was important. I never meant to get so obsessed, but I guess I let myself get carried away. Eric smiled. I'm flattered by your devotion, if I'm being honest. She smiled and took his hand, twisting the ring on his finger. They were quiet for a long moment as she realized some dull edge inside her had been smoothed. I think I need to get better about talking, like we used to. Clamming up has only made things worse. He nodded. And I need to start trusting you more. I've tried so hard to bury all my insecurities that they've become easy to ignore. Me too. Adriana whispered. I had this crippling fear when you left the house that maybe this time you'd never come back. Maybe I broke you for good this time. Maybe this time I deserved it. If I could carve my very heart out to prove to you that I'd never leave you, I'd do it. Well, that's gruesome. And wouldn't you leave me if you did such a horrid thing, seeing as you'd be dead? Eric huffed, though the dimples gave away his amusement. Gods, Annie, I'm trying to be romantic and use flowery language, and here you are injecting logic into it. Can't you just accept the analogy for my undying love? Okay, okay. Adriana giggled as he flopped his head back onto his pillow. No, get back up. I promise not to take you so seriously. Instead he took her face in his hands and said, My heart is yours, Adriana Haddock Larson. I'm not going anywhere. I made a promise to you and I intend to keep it. His thumb swiped away the tears creasing the corners of her eyes. I mean it. Adriana slid her fingers around his wrists, thumb sliding over his new tattoos. Thank you. And for the record, you're perfect the way you are. Don't put yourself in an early grave for stress. Not for me. He pursed his lips as if he wanted to argue. Because he wanted to do better, be better, give her and Darren everything. You've already done everything you need to. Adriana insisted. We have a home, we have food and more than enough money. Eric scoffed. That's not strictly. Listen. Adriana interrupted and he shut his mouth, grinning slightly. We have everything we need. Truly, we do. All we need is each other and Darren. And hope. Eric said. We can choose to be happy and content. Hard as it is. I am happy though. Adriana said. I think that's why I've been so miserable the last few days, my screw-ups aside. Everything I ever wanted is right here. I have no reason to be ungrateful. It's not bad to want more kids, but it's not as though I can't be thankful for what I have now. Like you said, they'll come, and if they don't, then how bad is it really? It's not. He brushed his fingers through her hair. You're right. Are you happy? Eric's eyes flicked up to meet hers. Yes. I think with all the busyness of life these last few years, I've forgotten what it was like just a few short years ago. Watching you date someone else and being so wretchedly jealous. Adriana giggled. And now look at us. Married with a son and a house and all the things we always wanted. Eric bent down to kiss her forehead and lingered. So, you're right. It's not so bad. Not really. Things could be a lot worse right now, for both of us. It was true, Adriana thought. There were so many avenues of life that could have happened. Eric could have been killed in the accident with his leg. Or he could have never walked again. She could have stayed with Brandine, allowed him to bully her into submission. She could have married him and moved away from Burke entirely, and then how hellish would her life really be? Eric might have settled down with someone else, but, maybe not, if his circumstances were so different. Maybe they would have both been painfully alone and sad. Gods, she really did have so much to be thankful for. Adriana leaned up to kiss him. It was soft and gentle, and he deepened it as she began to pull away, but it was what they needed. They'd said everything that needed to be said. In her heart, everything felt right again. Just as it should be. I love you, Eric whispered. More than anything. Adriana smiled against his ear as he buried his face in her neck. I love you, Teek. She suddenly thrashed against his fingers, digging into her waist. No, 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 stop please. The rest of her pleas were lost to cackles as he didn't relent, hovering over her as she struggled to get away. She tried to grab his wrists but found she had more success with her legs. Locking one leg around his and planting her knee into his hip, she pushed up with her hands and gave a sharp twist. She was partially successful in throwing him off, except she miscalculated both the distance and the strength of his grip on her arms. With a mixed yelp and shout, they both went tumbling over the edge of the bed with a crash that nearly shook the house. She quickly recovered and straddled his chest before locking his hands down to cease his relentless tickling, but he didn't seem to care as he was lost in laughter. Gods, I always forget how strong you are now. Adriana tried to blink the tears out of her eyes and catch her breath. What can I say? My brother taught me well on how to throw off assailants. Eric choked. Assailants? Is that what I am? Well, you were when you had the upper hand, Adriana said slowly, grinning as his eyebrows went up while she leaned forward, still pinning his hands down. But now it's my turn. His shaky breath had just caressed her lips when they heard it. A soft wail from down the hall. Adriana sighed. Well done, Mr. Larson. Hey, you're the one who tossed us off the bed. You started tickling me first. Not my fault you're so dang loud. Adriana smirked. Well, now you get to suffer alone. Eric huffed. Well, that's just, really cruel. Don't sound too disappointed. Adriana whispered onto his lips and quickly sat up. I'll come back to you. HMPH. Grinning, Adriana stood and promptly left the room as Darren began to wail in earnest. She rubbed her aching ribs as she went and began to plot her revenge. Eric had his ticklish spots too. Creeping into Darren's room, she found him sitting up in his bed with a stuffed toothless toy wrapped in his arms. She stepped over toys that were scattered across the blue rug and bent down to kiss his forehead. Don't cry, baby. Did you hear something? Darren hiccuped and nodded. I hear a loud sound. Yes, I'm sorry. Adriana whispered. The tickle monster came to get me, but Daddy saved me. Is it gone? The tickle monster. I sure hope so. He didn't go without a fight. You say Daddy saved you, Eric said from the doorway, and she looked over her shoulder in surprise. But really you saved yourself from the tickle monster. Ah well, this is true. Adriana said. I threw it right over the edge of the bed and then he scurried away like the coward he is. Eric's eyes narrowed in the dim light, but he said nothing as he approached and sat on the edge of the bed. Yup, the tickle monster is gone for now. Darren looked from him back to Adriana. Are we safe then? Adriana blinked in surprise. Of course, we're safe. Crawling onto the bed beside Eric, she pulled Darren into her lap. We won't let any tickle monsters or anyone else say otherwise. Not while we're around. Darren looked up at Eric, his blue eyes surprisingly bright. Almost as if looking to him for confirmation. Mama's right. Eric said. You're always safe as long as you can find us. Tickle monsters or no, you'll always be safe with us, buddy. This wasn't the first time they'd told him this in his 3 years of life. After all, he was their entire world. They knew what dangers lay just outside their borders. And though he didn't understand this, they still kept his imagination and his innocence pure. So even if all he ever faced was something as insignificant as the tickle monster, but he knew he was safe, that was all that mattered. He was sharp and clever for 3 years old. Adriana loved watching him puzzle things out and speak to people with more intelligence than she thought possible. Some people saw 3-year-olds and saw a tiny body with no brain at all, only capable of playing and crying. She'd always seen children as something to be treasured and molded. But her Darren was the most treasured of them all. She'd give her body and soul to protect him from the horrors she had faced as a child. So would Eric. She hoped and prayed Darren would never have to understand what sort of fears and responsibilities they carried. With any luck and grace by the gods, Darren would never have to face the challenges they feared. But gods help them, he would know he was loved. That they loved him. Every breath of every minute. Eric's fingers skimmed her arm and she realized her eyes were filled with tears again. She quickly brushed them away and patted Darren's hair down, though he was still looking at her with big eyes. Is Mama sad? No. Adriana whispered. I just love you so much. Darren blinked first at her, then at Eric. Mama's sad. We have ice cream. Adriana snorted into laughter as Eric grinned. You know, he gave her a sideways glance. I think we should have ice cream. He stood and lifted Darren into his arms, toothless plush and all. And besides, we've got to make up for our losses in some way. What losses? Adriana gaped as he smirked and turned from the room. I swear, husbands and their single-minded ways. Eric laughed as he led the way down the stairs. All I have to say is thank goodness for Darren and his excellent ideas. MHM. Adriana was quite sure they would regret this late-night ice cream spree in the morning, but she suddenly felt excited at this random prospect. She set about lighting candles throughout the house as Eric set Darren at the table and pulled bowls out of the cabinet. They had a small tub of ice cream hidden away in their icebox. Soon the sound of giggles and clinking spoons filled the Larson house amid the glow of candlelight. Though Adriana had no way of capturing time, the image of her boys laughing as Eric tried to stick a spoon to his nose knit itself onto her heart, forever etched into her memory. Yes, she had much to be thankful for. She'd do anything to protect this, her family. Meeting Eric's eyes, she saw that same love and devotion reflected there. And together they set their eyes on their chocolate ice cream covered son, blue eyes bright as a cloudless sky. For Darren, anything, everything, so long as they had breath to give. Worn metal hinges screeched as the cell door was thrown open and Brandine stalked through. A limp form lay on the table on the other side of the bars, still as death. Unconscious for now. Succumbed to the pain of torture, both emotional and physical. On the other end of the cell, slumped against a wall, was another prone form. Except, unlike the first, this one didn't breathe. No, the stillness of death had taken over his bones some time ago. Minutes. Hours. He didn't know. He didn't care. All he cared about was getting what he wanted. The information that he needed if he was going to pull this off. Now he had it. Years of scraping by, of skulking in the shadows like an eight-legged spider weaving its web. He'd had enough of shadows and darkness. He was ready to step into the sun and take back what was rightfully his. No one else would stand in his way. Not even a pair of traders. A worthy sacrifice, Brandine thought. Perhaps the one had found solace in his death, knowing that he'd kept his promises to the chieftains of Berk. He'd kept their secrets, even under pain of torture. But the other, stout-hearted and stubborn though he was, even he was no match for the pain of loss. The death of his friend followed by another bout of pain had been the final straw. And try as he might, Alton Brand was no match for Slaver Anton. Not when he was patient and knew exactly where on the body to draw out the most pain without killing a person. Despite Alton's threats that if they hurt Johann or worse then he'd never tell them anything, the slaver only smiled. As if those were the words he'd wanted to hear. As if he knew exactly what it would take to cause the boy to bleed most. The boy put up a fight, a voice crooned from the darkness and a pair of footsteps echoed not far behind Brandine. I'm surprised he didn't break sooner. Stubborn, like his father. Brandine muttered. Clyde taught him well. The voice chuckled. Berkian fathers teach their sons how to endure torture. My, Hiccup has been busy. Ignoring this, Brandine turned into his office and took a seat behind his desk. He glanced up at the broad-shouldered man with graying dark hair as he ran a finger along the top of a half-empty bookshelf and inspected the dust collected. Perhaps you should hire a maid. I'll take it out of your wages if it matters that much to you. The man's lips curled into a smirk, stretching the savage burn scar over his left eye. Though he was blind in that same eye, it did nothing to dull the spark of intelligence in the other. I wasn't aware that I had wages. After all, Viggo Grimborn said with a slow turn about the room, hands held behind his back. I'm only promised the dragons, which I cannot receive payment for until they are captured and sold to the highest bidder. Only then do I receive my wages, as you say. And by then I suspect neither of us will care about your lack of cleanliness. Brandine sat back in his chair. He still wasn't sure what to think of Viggo. It had taken months, no, years to track him down really. He had to admit that he hadn't anticipated that one of Hiccup's arch-nemesis to be so unreadable. Viggo was like a worn, burnished coin on both sides, flipping in the air over a fire. Light flashed over one side, drawing your attention, while the other was shrouded in darkness. Always calculating. Always plotting. And, from what he'd been told by Ali and Gray and many others, Viggo was dangerous. Brandine wasn't afraid of him, or anyone for that matter, but he understood what they meant. For some reason, he got the sense that if Viggo was offered something better or if the other side suited his own benefit, then he'd switch sides in a heartbeat. Which meant he was a commodity and a danger to his plan. Brandine was taking a massive gamble, one that he hadn't considered when he'd started searching out the man. But he'd had to make sacrifices. If he wanted to take back what was rightfully his, he needed to stop controlling every single little thing that happened. Hiccup was smart, there was no doubt about that. Indeed, it had been very difficult for them to do much of anything these last 3 years since the convocation because of the chieftains, all headed up by Hiccup and his blasted strategies. Well, what better way to counteract that than to surround himself with as many of Hiccup's enemies as possible? Still, it made him uneasy. Having Viggo Grimborn in his midst. What will you do with him? Viggo asked, skimming over the map on the desk with a well-trained eye. Alton. Brandine shrugged. We got what we wanted from him. He may know more. I doubt it. Johann and Alton had their uses, Brandine said, leaning back in his chair. But I doubt they knew much more than that. All we needed was the key to the archipelago. Now we have it. So you'll kill him then? Brandine shrugged again. I don't care either way. Viggo blinked and smiled in disbelief before leaning against the desk with both hands. He may have more uses than you've foreseen. Such as? People have value. You want me to make him a slave? That's not what I meant, but he could be your maid if you wish. Viggo, I don't have time for your useless jokes. Brandine snapped. I've already gotten what I want from him and that's all that matters. What's it to you if he lives or dies? This is what Slaver Anton meant when he called you rash, impetuous and impatient. Viggo said calmly. Brandine grinned. Right, but Anton has a right to his opinion. May I remind you of the sorry state I found you in? How long has it been since you were last in the archipelago? You could have finished Hiccup off any time in the last 30 years, but where were you? Oh yeah, bowing and scraping on the continent for a king who was about to put your head in a basket for debts you haven't been able to pay. Viggo's smile turned icy. Dragon hunting is not as easy as it looks. The continent has dragons you've never even seen before. They're not like the dragons in the archipelago. Which is exactly why you leapt at the chance to work for me. Brandine said, hands braced against the table as he stood. He didn't blink as he stared into the scarred face. We have much to gain by working together, but last I checked I am in charge here. You want Alton? Fine, take him. I don't care. But I say dump him overboard because he's useless cargo now. Viggo stared into his face for a long moment and then slowly straightened. If there's one thing Hiccup and I have in common, it's this truth, no one is useless. Brandine burned with anger as the man turned away, the low light shining off the shoulders of his sleeveless leather tunic. Why do you do that? Viggo paused. Do what? Talk about him with this reverence. Brandine spat, nearly choking on the word. If you hate him so much. Hate him. Viggo turned, a smirk on his face. I don't hate him. I have much to gain from him, yes, but I don't hate him. No, I respect him. Brandine's hands curled into fists. Why? Why else? Because he is my equal. A better strategist I have never found. Viggo said primly. I am looking forward to our next game of maces and talons. With that, he strode from the room and disappeared. Brandine stood in his office alone for a moment, pondering this information. He had a lot to gain from Viggo's involvement. It was another large facet of his plan that he'd been weaving for years. He'd put in a lot of time and effort to find him, and expected it to be difficult to sway the man to his cause. And yet Viggo had merely smiled and agreed, not 5 minutes into their conversation over cheap ale and stale bread way out in the countryside of the mainland. Miles and miles and miles he'd had to travel to find him, to receive a positive response so quickly, so willingly. To this day Brandine still couldn't put a finger on it. To know if he'd perhaps made a mistake in bringing in Hiccup's most calculating enemy. No, he was Hiccup's most calculating enemy. And he'd done most of everything on his own, up until Hiccup, up until his own mother ruined everything. Until he'd lost Adriana, the key to his whole scheme. Viggo was just a pretentious old man trying to fit in with the big dogs again. He'd sniffed a crumb, like a little mouse did, and was now sniffing around for the cheese, hoping to find more than a mere morsel. Brandine rolled his eyes and dropped into his chair again. Donna. She emerged in moments from her post outside the door. Her hair was still cut at a razor-sharp angle at her chin, almost as sharp as her smile. Yes, dear. Flicking his eyes up to meet hers, he said, send the letters. All of them. No, half of them. Brandine snapped. Of course, all of them. Okay. Donna said, holding her hands up. "I'll send them." Brandine scribbled down a pair of notes on his ledger before glancing up at her. "Preferably now." Yet she didn't move. Not for a long pause until she kicked the door closed with her toe and moved around the desk. He knew that look, that walk. He huffed. "I really don't have time for this." "Really?" Dana said, perching on the edge of his desk and running a finger down his arm. "Not even 10 minutes. Brandine fought a smile. "That's a little below the belt, even for you. And you never do anything but drive yourself into the ground with all your ceaseless revenge," Dana said, leaning down until her breath warmed his neck. "So, take a break." He should tell her to go away, to send the letters like she was told. There was too much to do and so little time. But, she had a point. And it had been a while. Brandine dropped his charcoal with a flick of his fingers. "Fine. But we'll do it in 5. Dana's victorious smirk was the only thing he saw before she clapped her lips onto his. Though a small part of himself cared for her, deep inside, and he was glad she was there, he also knew what she really was. She was only a distraction. Perhaps one of the few people he allowed himself to be even slightly vulnerable with. Even after all these years of their flings and long nights and short trysts, he was quite sure that she was more attached to him than he was to her. He couldn't allow himself to be so weak as to bind himself to someone else. Not while he had a greater purpose in mind. A real relationship, love, even with Dana, it was a horrid thought. He didn't want it. So he endured their little moments, let her have the satisfaction of thinking she'd won for now. But somehow he didn't have it in him to be so cruel to tell her these things. To tell her that he felt nothing. Sure, she made him feel something for a few minutes, but not much. Nothing concrete. After all, he only ever really had one goal in mind, and at the end of the day, she was a distraction and an employee. He'd trained her well in gathering information. She was one of his top spies now. Still, if she wanted to risk heartbreak, that was her problem. She should know better. He was, after all, nothing but a monster. Chapter 5, Memories and Mementos. Chapter text. Astrid Horferson Haddock was many things. A warrior, a wife, a chiefess, a teacher, a friend. Being a mom outshined them all. It was her greatest pride, seeing her 2 babies fully grown, starting families of their own. Still living, breathing, all in one piece. Well, mostly. They hadn't lost limbs, but they both had enough emotional scars to season even the stoutest of warriors. And yet they still smiled. They still had spirit and passion. They still loved life. She and Hiccup might have screwed up in dozens, no, hundreds of ways as they raised their twins. But seeing them happy on their 21st birthday brought Astrid more pride than she ever thought possible. As per usual, she kept these thoughts gathered up in her heart to inspect and treasure at a later time. Even after all these years and their various ups and downs as a family, she still wasn't fond of looking at her emotions too closely if she wasn't ready. She had a lot on her mind besides. What with Snotlout and the twins' long-awaited arrival after a week away to search for Alton and Johan, tensions were beginning to run high. Hiccup had taken to staring at the far-off horizon as if he could sense their approach, just as Toothless would follow his gaze and sniff the air. And yet nothing. They would return with news, she was sure of it. In the meantime they needed to keep their heads and be patient. Not cause the brand's unnecessary stress, particularly Taryn. She was due to give birth in just under a month and it wouldn't do for her to go into premature labor. Not if Astrid could help it. So on the morning of the twins' birthday, Astrid was meeting Finn for an early breakfast at the Great Hall. Well, she supposed it was no different than their usual morning breakfast meetings. She couldn't deny however that this one was special. 21. It felt like yesterday she herself was 21 and now. Refusing to think about her own age and thus turn her thoughts to more speculative endeavors, she forced her mind on the path ahead. It was bad enough that she'd burst into tears on multiple occasions after Finn moved out of the house. She wasn't going to do that today. It had been so strange, having no kids in the house. Finn had always been a boisterous child, coming and going with loud bangs and heavy-booted steps and jangling weapons no matter what age. Adriana had always been a quieter presence, but a presence no less. She'd always be curled up in some corner reading or baking cookies with Eric. But now that they were all grown up with homes of their own, the Haddock home had felt distinctly empty. She'd always heard that becoming an empty nester hit different for everyone. Lara Larson had been very pleased indeed, happy to no longer have others under her roof so she could do whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted. Though she meant nothing negative by it, Astrid could understand the sentiment. Raising twins herself had been a lot of work. But raising 5 kids? She couldn't imagine. Astrid refused to think too hard about it, but she hated the quietness of the house. She'd spent the first week after Finn moved out spending most of her time around the village and the arena. Hiccup had eventually sought her out, insisting she had to come home and face the music. "I know you don't want to talk about it, but the fact is," Astrid Hiccup had said calmly, wincing slightly as her eyes had narrowed dangerously. "If you don't come home, then I'm left alone to my own devices. And imagine the state of the house when that happens." He'd said it teasingly and it had dimmed the ire rolling through her veins. It was true though. Whenever she and the kids had been gone for long periods of time, Hiccup would inevitably bring more tools and gears and inventions into the house, and that simply would not do. Just because they no longer had babies in the house didn't mean the house needed to become a widespread workbench. So she'd gone home. She'd thrown herself into chores, cooking them dinner. Hiccup tried and failed to help, as did Toothless, reorganizing shelves that had been driving her crazy for months, starting laundry. And upon finding one of Finn's forgotten socks, she promptly burst into tears. Once it started, it didn't seem to stop. Hiccup had given her a hug, but it didn't seem to help. She missed Finn and she hadn't properly seen him most of that week due to unpacking and traveling to Jut. He was busy, yes, and he shouldn't have to go out of his way to remember his old and graying mother, but God's blast it, he'd been gone for 5 days and he'd forgotten about her already. Hiccup had insisted she take a hot bath to relax while he sorted this out. Astrid hadn't had much fight left in her and obeyed, which a tiny part of her soul cringed at. But clearly she was more upset that she gave herself credit for if she didn't even want to argue with him. Much to her surprise, Finn tramped through the front door the next morning with a grin, a new Jatan dagger, and insisted on breakfast. Clearly Hiccup had talked to him. Though she walked within herself at the time, knowing how busy he was and not wanting to take him away from his duties, Finn had merely rolled his matching blue eyes and grabbed her hand. "Stop that now, you hangry woman. Let's get breakfast." She'd slapped his arm for his sass, but grinned at his victorious smirk. And that had been that. It was like their morning routine had never changed. Months later she was grateful for their morning routine. It had taken some adjusting and learned communication since they no longer lived under the same roof, but they'd had never had a problem communicating. At least now she knew to be prepared for another change in his routine after he got married, which was next week. Next week. Astrid's stomach gave a nervous flop, even as she sidestepped a cart and nodded at the driver. The wedding was next week. She knew this of course, but in no time at all it had flown up on them. Even now decorations were being hung throughout the streets. White and gold streamers and flags were being hung from houses and torch brackets. She vaguely wondered if they were being put up too soon, but didn't question it. This was only the beginning of Burke's well-known decoration process and Gobber and Grandma Ingerman were no pushovers. She wouldn't badger them with ideas of her own. Not when party planning wasn't her area of expertise. Hundreds of people would be arriving for the wedding. Adriana and Eric's wedding had been a large affair, just as Hiccup's and her own wedding had been all those years ago. But Finn and Genevieve's, it very much seemed like everyone in the archipelago wanted to be there. Her chest burned with pride again. Her fearless Finn deserved a big wedding, after everything he'd been through. And the Jatans were no pushovers either. They were pulling out all the stops for Genevieve's wedding, going so far as to send decorations and preparations for the food weeks in advance by ship. Jut's cook would be combining his efforts with Burke's own, and were apparently preparing a feast. This was normal for Viking standards, of course, but Astrid's eyes had flown wide at the menu when Genevieve had shown it to her the other day. Roast pork and boar with chutney, roasted vegetables, homemade rolls, pecan and strawberry salad, the Jatan cook's famous apple crumble with vanilla ice cream and caramel sauce, and, to Eric and Adriana's delight, their famous mint chocolate cookies. And the wedding cake, of course. Beverages included Goba's famous wine, Jatan ale, and various tonic waters. Astrid didn't know how they were possibly going to pull this off. If it had just been their combined villages, surely it wouldn't be such a difficult feat. But with all the visitors coming, how did the cooks and all their workers possibly hope to accomplish it all? When she'd voiced these thoughts to Genevieve last week, the girl had merely smiled. Any problems on the day won't reach my ears, so I'm not going to worry about it. Fair point. There was nothing more frustrating than people bringing the bride problems with wedding preparations, especially on the wedding day itself. The bride and groom were already stressed about a great many things. Mainly, getting married and fighting nervousness and other things. Anything else could, and would, be handled by other people. Genevieve was a godsend. Ever since they were little, Astrid wondered if there could possibly be anyone out there who could handle her spirited fearless Finn. For a time she'd wondered if Helga Ingerman might be that person, except. Well, once it fell apart it seemed it wasn't meant to be. They were best friends and close companions. They'd do anything for each other, except, perhaps, open that door again. And Astrid had had such doubts about Genevieve. Someone so unapologetically girly seemed too soft for Finn. Compared to the things he'd seen in this cruel world, how could she be more than a pretty face? How could she ever understand the things he'd been through, let alone help him through it? Except Genevieve had surprised her over and over again. Soft she may appear, she had a strong will and was not afraid to state her opinions. She was direct, concise, and kind. Somehow, some way she'd soothed those hard edges that Finn had carried for so long. Of course, Astrid had no doubts that the beautiful girl had caught Finn's eye within seconds of meeting her. Which was no doubt why he'd looked so disappointed at Eric and Adriana's wedding when he'd returned to the Great Hall to find they'd already left. Maybe that's why she suggested to Hiccup that Finn should train Jet. It was a test and one they needed to give him, to grow as a leader and future chief. It was utterly necessary. But if she was being honest, deep down, she wanted to give her boy a chance to see that pretty girl again. And now look at them. A few years down the road and on the cusp of getting married. Starting a new life together. Astrid couldn't help the proud smile this time. The hustle and bustle of the village was a cathartic hum around her. So deep in her thoughts as she was, she almost didn't notice the voice calling her from behind. Blinking, she turned and found Finn running after her with his arms held aloft. Halloo! Finn grinned. You didn't hear me. Sorry, I was thinking. Astrid hugged him once he caught up. Happy birthday. Thanks. Finn stepped back, a brow raised. Normally thinking is Dad's thing. You feeling okay? Hey, I think, too. Astrid said indignantly. I just don't obsess over things until I get a nosebleed. Ha ha. Finn led the way up the stairs to the Great Hall, taking in the surrounding buildings being decorated in streamers. Oh no. Already? Yup. Apparently they need to start now if they hope to get everything done in time. Finn watched as a trio of men on dragons hung more streamers, his brow furrowed. Astrid watched him, wondering if he was being critical of their work or if the expression was hiding some other emotion. He took a deep breath. Well, I just hope they don't fall down before then. Otherwise they'll have to come back to fix them. True. Astrid said, continuing up the stairs. I wonder why the streamers aren't being put up last. Finn shrugged. Moments later they entered the Great Hall and joined the line of early morning workers getting breakfast before the start of another day. They filled their plates and found a secluded table in the back, chatting idly about the decorations and food as they ate. What's Dad doing today? He's organizing the houses people will be staying in next week. They're mostly ready to go, but you know him. He wants to make sure everything is perfect and comfortable. Finn nodded, picking at the remainder of his eggs. I suppose he's got to occupy his time with something. It sounded like he meant it as a joke, but it came out flat. Which meant he was distracted. Astrid set down her glass. Finn, what's wrong? He looked up at her. Huh? Nothing. I'm good. Are you sure? Because you seem a bit. What was the word? Distracted. Finn glanced to the bar where Ben the baker could be heard barking orders to the scullery maids about sugar, flowers and icing for a certain wedding cake. You don't say. Oh. Well, of course, he'd be distracted. Just tune them out. They're just doing their job. No, it's not that. Finn said, rubbing his eyes. I'm just ready for it to be over. And I don't mean it as if I'm not grateful or excited, but... Astrid reached out and squeezed his arm, feeling the cord muscles beneath his gear. So much strength in that arm, and yet that's all so many people saw. But he was just like everyone else, insecure and nervous about getting married in a week. I understand. It's been a long time of waiting. And though it's exciting, getting married is a big responsibility. There's no shame in admitting you're nervous. Yeah, I know. For him to even admit that much or not argue only proved how far he'd come. A few short years ago he'd be hard-pressed to admit he was nervous about anything. I'm proud of you. Astrid said finally. Finn met her eyes in surprise. I know I don't say it. But I couldn't be more proud if I tried. Astrid said, blinking away the sudden burn in her eyes. Finn gave her a small understanding smile. I know. Thanks, Mom. Sniffing sharply, Astrid quickly looked away. She would not cry. If she had to gouge out her own eyes on the wedding day to keep from crying, so be it. As if reading her thoughts, Finn laughed suddenly and she glared. He held up his hands but said nothing. Good. Cheeky little weasel. On the morning of Adriana's 21st birthday, she was awoken to the sharp pitter-patter of small feet before a mass leapt atop of her in bed. Mama! Mama, wake up! Darin shouted. It's your birthday. A pair of hands lifted her curtain of hair off of her face. She cracked her eyes open and couldn't help but smile at the pair of blue eyes an inch away from her nose. Up, Mama, up! Daddy make you breakfast. Stretching, Adriana rolled over and pulled Darin into her chest for a hug. That was nice of him. What did he make? Darin put a finger to his lips. Is a secret. Oh. Adriana whispered. Is it something special? Yeah, it's something special with snackages but is a secret. Oh. Adriana tapped her nose mischievously. Well, we won't tell Daddy. Darin gave her a conspiratorial grin but soon was distracted when the door was pushed open by Eric, carrying a massive square of wood. Oh my. Eric, what did you do? Smiling, Eric set it on the bed and she gaped. He'd made a charcuterie board full of their favorite snacks, all in the shape of a giant heart. Strawberries, grapes, blueberries, oranges, along with sliced meats and cheese, crackers, nuts, toast and jellies, and even sweet buns. How he'd managed to make it all fit so perfectly was beyond her. Oh, it's beautiful. Adriana said. How long? Never mind that. Eric slid into a spot beside her and kissed her. Happy birthday. Thank you. Adriana took his hand even as she reached out to take a few blueberries before Darin ate them all, as he was prone to do. I almost don't want to take anything and mess it up. It's a work of art that's meant to be consumed. Eric said, removing a slice of orange and pulling the rind off before handing it to Darin. What do you want to do today? Adriana watched Darin eat his orange slice carefully in case he choked, which he was also prone to do. He loved fruit a little too much. I want to spend the day with my boys, maybe go for a hike or something. Obviously we have the party this evening, which I'm almost loath to go to. Why? It'll be fun. Besides, you and Finn deserve a party. Maybe. I just don't like being the center of attention, you know that. Well, it's our closest friends, not the whole village. It'll be fun. True. Besides, it will be our last hurrah before Finn and Jen get married, and Cliff and Taryn have the baby. It will be hard for any of us to get together after this. Adriana took a bite of her sweet roll with a shrug. I guess. It's just a part of life, being busy. They'll learn how to make time just like we did. Yeah, but it'll be harder for Finn and General, Eric said, grabbing another slice of orange. Your dad hasn't mentioned when he wants to retire, has he? No, I imagine sometime in the next 10 years, maybe even 5. It all depends on what happens next, I guess. Adriana looked over at Eric, confused by his full mouth hum. His lips looked strangely protruded before he grinned, his teeth replaced by a bright orange peel. Oh gods, what are you, 6? Adriana laughed. Darren, look at Daddy. Darren was delighted by the orange slice trick, and soon their conversation was lost to laughter. Soon all sorts of foods were used to recreate animals' characteristics, like dragon fangs or walrus tusks, which in truth they'd only ever seen in books. They didn't eat even half of the charcuterie board's contents, but soon had to call their fun quits before food was strewn all over the bed and floor. Still, it was perhaps the best birthday breakfast she'd ever had. As Darren exited the room and toddled down the stairs some time later, Eric on his heels, Adriana caught his sleeve. I didn't tell you what else I want to do for my birthday. Eric's brows went up. Oh. I was thinking after the party, we'd have a late-night flight. Adriana said in a quiet voice. She slid her arms around his neck and added, stay out for hours until our hands get so cold we have to come home and find some way to warm them up. As my lady commands. It is, after all, your birthday. Adriana said, fighting a strangely giddy smile. It's a date then. Eric laughed and swiftly kissed her. A date with my Annie. What could be better? Adriana breathed a laugh as he released her and went downstairs in search of Darren. Mittens the cat followed closely behind, clearly interested in what was happening. Adriana returned to their room and entered their massive closet in search of something to wear for the day. It was going to be another hot day. Eventually she settled on a purple shirt, a comfy pair of leggings, and a belt. The belt was for decoration, but as she tightened it she caught sight of her weapons belt, sitting on top of her dresser. The 2 daggers Finn had gifted her lay untouched in their sheaths, both inscribed with a word in Latin. Fortum. Fortis. Brave and strong. It had been a long while since she'd worn the weapons belt. Once she'd started training with Finn and a few others, she'd taken to wearing the belt everywhere. It had seemed clunky at first, weapons jostling at her hips everywhere she walked, not to mention weighing her down. But she'd quickly grown accustomed to their weight, and more importantly what they symbolized. Her training had been rigorous. She'd never been particularly lazy, but the training had quickly proved how out of shape she was. It was a few weeks of exhaustion and soreness before her body began to take on a new strength, and strangely, she even had a new confidence. All of it to protect herself and her family should the need arise. While she knew she could still depend on others, it wasn't enough to expect others to protect her. Not when she was fully capable. Not while she had things to fight for, too. Herself, her husband, her son, her brother, her parents, her home. If push came to shove. If she ever found herself in a position again that she needed to protect herself or someone she loved, she'd be ready. But how ready was she if that need arose and her weapons were sitting unused, unpracticed in her closet, gathering dust? Motherhood was a busy job. As was being a wife. It was perfectly natural that she got distracted and forgot about them after a while. Not to mention the hassle of wearing weapons while picking up toys or washing dishes. However, this was perfectly normal for Viking women. All the women she'd ever known her entire life did their household duties with weapons. It wasn't a question of what was comfortable or practical. It was about being ready at a moment's notice for anything. Danger didn't discriminate. It didn't knock on your door to ask permission before entering. Danger didn't wait. It snuck up on you unawares, ready to take. And what good was her training if she wasn't ready? She might not have time to waste to run home and grab her weapons if something were to happen. By then it could be too late. Steeling herself, Adriana grabbed the weapons belt and strapped it on over her hips. The weight was back, heavier than she remembered, but she'd get used to it soon. She didn't expect anything bad to even happen, but the point was clear. Her weapons were useless if she didn't have them when she needed them. Even if she didn't need them until next week, next year, or 10 years. Fix poor habits today. Be ready today. For you never know when danger will strike. When she entered the living room a few minutes later, her weapons belt jangling with each step, Eric glanced at her in surprise. Hoping to get a workout in before we start the day? No. They're just no use gathering dust. Eric nodded but looked away quickly with a smile. What? Adriana looked down at her clothes. Do they clash with my outfit? Not at all. Eric slid an arm around her waist and pulled her closer. I love it when you handle knives, remember? Adriana grinned and patted his chest. I'll try not to turn you on too much. Eric smirked. Too late. Oh, stop. Adriana laughed, trying not to blush. Let's get ready for that hike or we'll never get anywhere. Yes'm. So together they packed a large satchel with a blanket, water skins, a few toys to distract Darren, and the remainder of their charcuterie board snacks. They laced up Darren's boots and put on his lightest jacket and laughed as he bolted out the back door into the wild outdoors before Eric could grab the dragons. Lily and Charger were part of the family, too, and would surely like to come. Adriana ran after Darren as he sprinted up the path to Troll Bridge, cackling at the sound of her approaching steps. The sun danced in their shared golden hair. Morning dew flashed in the tall grass and buds of wild flowers that they passed. The air was warm and smelled of dirt and sunshine and happiness. She caught up to Darren and scooped him up, spinning him around and around until their laughter was echoing through the trees. 2 pairs of heavy footsteps approached and she stopped spinning in time to see Lily and Charger kicking up dirt and crushing flowers in their wake. Eric grinned down at them from his saddle. Cheater. Adriana said, panting. Eric shrugged. Man with a peg leg. I have a valid excuse. MHM. Darren wriggled to be set down so she released him, watching as he continued up the path to Troll's Bridge. Eric dismounted and backed away as Charger took off after the little boy. Lily stayed with them, setting her nose into Adriana's neck and purring deeply as she scratched her scales. Hey girl. We're going on a date night flight tonight, how does that sound? Lily purred deeper, clearly excited at this prospect. They didn't go on long flights for pleasure as often as they used to. Before things got so busy. Adriana kissed her nose, then instantly pulled back. Ick. I don't know how I always forget about the fiery secretions on your scales. Adriana said, wiping her lips on her sleeve. Tasty. Ignoring Eric's laugh, she stuck her nose up in the air and walked ahead on the path after Darren. Rude, Mr. Larson. So very rude. Eric caught up and took her hand. Well, at least you can kiss me any ole time without any fiery secretions. Lily's wing came out and chuffed him on the head, knocking him off balance. A tar girl. Adriana laughed. Shaking his head to fix his hair, Eric pulled her forward as Troll Bridge finally came into view. Darren was climbing on the rocks above the opening, Charger watching with keen interest. They allowed Darren a few minutes to play before urging him to continue forward, inviting him on a new adventure. He rejoined them eagerly, hair bouncing as he ran ahead. Every few minutes they were distracted by various things in nature. Birds darting through the trees and tall grass, fleeing as they appeared. A beehive, which they were keen to steer clear of. Colorful rocks and even a dark-skinned, red-bellied salamander under a particularly large one. Darren wanted to bring it home as a pet, but as neither of them knew how to care for such a creature, they withstood the small temper tantrum and left the poor thing to its home in the dirt. Darren was soon distracted by a group of dragon riders flying overhead, heading to the east. Likely the next group of scouts taking over for the morning shift. The temperature rose with the sun, but so did their spirits. It was a beautiful day with only a few clouds in the sky. The air was sweet and calming. Everything was quiet and peaceful. They crossed a creek, careful to step on stones and not slip into the water. A memory of a walk with Astrid rose into Adriana's mind. An eternity ago. A lifetime ago. When their family's life had been full of such darkness, when Finn had run away and become a slave. When her daddy had gone after him. When Astrid had taken her on a hike to mend their relationship and clumsily fallen into the ice-cold creek, dragging her daughter down with her. Then finished with a long flight on Stormfly to dry off and surveying the horizon on a distant cliff. Taking Eric's and Darren's hands, Adriana pulled them off the path and through a copse of trees. Let's go this way. I want to see something. It was a long walk, and after some time Darin began to whine. Eric lifted him to his shoulders, but that didn't seem to fix the problem. He was soon distracted with a toy and a small bag of berries to snack on. Eventually the trees cleared into an open field that spread out into the edge of a cliff, bordered with pine trees and boulders. And spread out before them was Berk and the ocean beyond. "Wow," Eric said, stopping a safe distance from the edge. "I've never been here before. How did you know about this place?" Adriana released his hand and approached a massive, well-worn oak tree. Carved there was a pair of names: Hiccup and Astrid. She smoothed a hand over the old words, softened with age, but still visible. "This used to be their spot. My parents. My mom brought me up here once. Back when my dad and Fishlegs went to get Finn from Mayro." Adriana paused and looked at him in surprise. "Wait. You know?" Eric adjusted his grip on Darin's ankles. "I never wanted to ask him, but we all knew Benen was a former slave, right? And Finn has always had this burden for slaves. Benen was his world, but it seemed to go deeper than that. And then after the convocation, and other things that were said sometimes, like the time I asked him if I was his slave, and he got all quiet." He shrugged. "I put two and two together. Does he know you've guessed?" Eric shrugged again. "I know it's not something he likes to talk about. I don't want to put him on the spot. If he ever wants to talk about it, like he did once with Rain, he will." "Fair, and so true. Anyway, my mom brought me here after my dad and Fishlegs left to find Finn," Adriana said, facing the horizon once more. The wind here was chilly, but it was nothing compared to the chilling memories that emerged, such as when her mother had told her the future of their family. "My parents almost got a divorce, you know. This is where my mom told me." Eric gave her a sad look and squeezed her hand. "I was so angry and distraught. There was so much going on and my relationship with her wasn't great already." Adriana exhaled slowly. "Obviously we've mended things just as they did, but I've never come back here since. I guess the memories are still fresh, even 14 years later." 14 years. She and Finn were 7 when their parents' fighting had taken a new, darker turn. When Astrid had slapped her in a public setting. When Finn had had enough and left Berk entirely on Johann's ship. When he'd been taken against his will on Rune and branded as a slave. So long ago, and yet it feels like yesterday. So much has changed. Eric squeezed her hand again. "We don't have to stay here, you know. If it's bringing up too many dark memories." Adriana met his eyes. "Oh no, I'm okay. It's just weird, I guess. How time flies, how so much can happen, how it could have been so much worse. Her parents divorced. Finn dead or never to be seen again. Where would she be today if that had happened? She couldn't fathom how different things would be. And all that before Brandine had ever entered her life." Eric stayed quiet at her side, allowing her to think. Darin seemed to be allowing her the opportunity to reflect and reminisce and once again be thankful that things had turned out so gloriously good and right and perfect compared to the alternatives. Then she remembered a quiet Darin was never a good thing, and looked up. Her eyes flew wide and she choked on a laugh. "Uh-oh," Eric said, voice laced with dread. "What's happening up there?" Darin, still perched on Eric's shoulders, was eating his blueberries happily. His hands and face were stained purple, as were his sleeves, the front of his shirt, and portions of Eric's wavy hair. "Annie. It's all right," Adriana said through a fit of giggles. "Though purple highlights look nice on you." "Great. Darin, what have you done to me?" Darin faced his daddy, oblivious to the problem. He grabbed Eric's face and pulled it back so their eyes could meet. "What, daddy? Are you dyeing my hair back there?" "No, I eat my berries." "That's what I said." Darin released his face, effectively smearing Eric's face in purple streaks. He gave a long-suffering sigh. "We'll be stopping home for a bath before going into the village." "No, no, let's stop and say hi to everyone." "Absolutely not, you fiendish woman." Adriana's cackles echoed down the ravine, soon joined by Darin's. He didn't know what was happening or understand why it was so funny, but Eric's nonplussed expression had sent Adriana into a fit of laughter. "This is why," Adriana said finally, wiping her eyes. "I tell you to stop freezing the blueberries." Eric sighed again, turning away from the cliffside and heading back into the woods. "But they taste better when they're frozen." "Yes, but when they thaw they turn everything purple, including your gorgeous face. Besides, do you know how hard it is to get purple out of material?" "And since when do you have a problem with purple material?" Eric asked with a smirk. "I do when it's white. If we don't get both of your shirts in the wash soon, they'll stain forever." "What do you mean? My shirt's fine, isn't it?" Eric asked suddenly, looking down at himself. Adriana pursed her lips. "What, you haven't noticed the blueberries gathering on the back of your neck?" Eric gave another long-suffering sigh and muttered something incoherent. Grinning, Adriana leaned up on tiptoes and kissed his cheek. "For the record, you look good in blueberry." Despite himself, Eric gave a satisfied smile, earning himself another laugh. Strolling back through the woods the way they'd come, they soon became aware of a certain toddler's increased irritation at being covered in purple juice. Soon Eric was whistling for Charger and Lily, who both swooped into the clearing within a few minutes. "Darin, do you want to fly with Mama or Daddy?" Adriana asked. Irritation momentarily forgotten, Darin reached out his hands toward her. Adriana pulled him down from Eric's shoulders and mounted Lily's saddle, smirking as Eric became aware of all the blueberries now falling down the back of his shirt. He flapped the material around, wincing at the sight of all the berries now dropping onto his boots. Soon he gave up and pulled himself into his saddle, Charger holding still so he could clip his prosthetic into the stirrup first. Adriana held Darin in her lap and carefully belted him in with the straps on the saddle before saying, "Okay, Lily." Lily spread her massive purple wings, which shimmered in the morning sunlight. In 2 easy flaps they were rising into the sky, the combined wind buffeted from both Lily's and Charger's wing beats sending dust and leaves and needles flying through the clearing. Soon they caught an updraft and angled toward the ravine before tucking in their wings and diving. It wasn't a steep dive but Darin still squealed, holding onto her arm tightly. Adriana grinned. Riding was in his blood. She thought forward a few years, wondering what sort of dragon he might bond with. The thought of him bonding with his own dragon and riding through the archipelago someday filled her with excitement and pride and fear all at once. But not yet. Someday, but not for a long while. For now she held him close and watched as his blue eyes glittered with joy as the trees and river and soon the village swept below. Lily banked around the watermill, water spraying upward with the wind and catching them with cold prickles. Darin cackled and waved as a few workers waved, grinning as they flashed by. Eric and Charger drew up beside them, nose to nose with Lily. The rush of challenge entered Charger's expression but Eric kept him firmly in place. Though it was tempting, Darin was much too small for a high-speed chase. Again, someday, but not today. No, today they were happy to bask in the sunlight and in each other's presence. As Adriana surveyed the village she loved below, her husband at her side, her dragon beneath her, and her son in her arms, she couldn't help but feel a strong rush of joy. Joy. The word resonated in her chest, making her feel light and happy and carefree in a way she hadn't felt in years. She looked over at Eric and grinned. He smiled back and winked. Holding Darin close, she gave him a firm kiss on the cheek. "I love you, baby." "Love you too, Mama," Darin said, looking up at her with berry-stained teeth. Her heart soared as high as the sky. Nothing could be better than this. Nothing. Drip. 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 Sound. That was the first thing that cut through the haze that was Alton's brain. The steady drip was distant, like his ears had been filled with cotton. He didn't remember thinking of hanging on to that sound, but once noticed it seemed his consciousness latched onto it, tethering him to earth, leading him out of the darkness, back to reality. Drip. 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 And then his brain started to pick up other things. Cold. His body felt cold, like it had been left in the rain too long. Exposed. He shivered, turning his head to the side and cracking his eyes open. He hissed at the stream of white light cutting through a nearby window, the only source of light. He recoiled, eyes burning in his skull, and then he gasped as a flash of pain shot through his now full conscious body, reminding him of the pain. The injuries. Oh gods! Alton gritted his teeth against the pain, waiting for it to wane. Panting, he opened his eyes again to take stock of the room. A black ceiling, a crisscross network of bars on his right. An empty cell save for the metal table he lay on and the chained cuffs against the blood-stained wall beyond his boots. The clink of chains was sharp in his ears, echoing slightly in the cavernous room. Blood. Long since dried, but no less stark in the light that shone through the window. It beat down in an almost heavenly light, and yet it was merciless on his eyes. His head pounded, and as he tried to swallow, he realized how dry his mouth was. How raw his throat felt from screaming. The momentary confusion he'd felt at first waking was gone. Now he remembered. An involuntary gasp launched from his throat, but he stubbornly cut it off, gritting his teeth. Just as quickly as the pain registered in his body, his arms, his legs, his face, his breath came in sharp and fast pants. His heart began to race. Still captured. Still stuck here. Nobody came for me. Nobody is coming. Johann. No. Though it hurt like hell to do so, Alton gripped the edge of the metal table he was lying on and squeezed hard. Hard enough to make his sore hands shriek and his nails to bend. Anything to get himself to focus. To breathe. Just breathe. I will not break. I will not die here. But even as he forced himself to take slow, deep breaths, willing himself to keep calm, his mind was already taking stock of injuries. The bruises. The burns. The cuts. His face gave a particular throb at that, as if reminding him that there were injuries there. Or maybe his mind was that sluggish. He hadn't had food or water in days. His injuries would get infected if they weren't treated soon. He swore to himself that he would not be a casualty to Brandine's games, and yet he had absolutely no control here. How long had it been since he was captured? Hell, he wasn't sure if he could escape if tried. Could he even stand? Angry at himself, he lifted his head and looked down at himself. Everything felt heavy, and not because of the chains holding down his hands and arms and legs. He really must be weak if everything felt so horrible. He took stock of the table, the room. There was no ornamentation to the cell, so there was nothing he could use as a weapon, if he even got that far. The cell door was shut, presumably locked. Beyond that he could see down a long dark hallway, lit by the occasional sconce, but it wasn't much. There was a gentle sway to the room, which he'd assumed was disorientation. Now he recognized the sensation. He was on a ship. Other than that, everything was dark, black, and cold. So far as he could see, there was nobody in sight. Just as well for him. The thought of Brandine or the calculating man with the goatee showing up, or Slaver Anton. Alton gave an involuntary shiver and dropped his head back to the table with a thud. Already he felt exhausted. He began to shake uncontrollably, but from stress or fear or pain he didn't know. He tried again to force himself to relax, but it seemed once it started he couldn't stop. Stress. It's stress. It's okay, it's normal. Just think of something else, not him. Slaver Anton's grinning face came to his mind regardless. No. Burke. They're in danger. It's my fault. No, not my fault. I couldn't help it, not after. Johann. Tears burned his eyes suddenly. Johann. He'd tried so hard to fight it, to fight them, to threaten if they hurt or killed Johann he'd never tell them anything. Anton had only smiled. What came next? The shaking worsened. Gods, stop. Stop it. Alton said to himself. His voice was scratchy and so dry it hurt. He'd been helpless before. Afraid. He'd lost loved ones before. But this, nothing could compare to this. Johann and Maybelle had been his only friends in the world outside of Burke. Now he'd lost them both. A pit of frustration and anxiety and terror and anger rose unbidden in his chest. How the hell was he going to survive this? A creaking door sounded far, far down the hall. Alton went rigid. Footsteps echoed in wet slaps against the floor far, far away, and yet they drew nearer with every beat of his racing heart. He began to shake more, though he tried not to. Silently he counted the steps as they drew closer and counted the faces of those he loved. Mom. Dad. Taryn. Cliff. Inga. Alton closed his eyes, not caring that tears slid down his face into the tender, swollen cuts on his cheekbones. Would he even get to meet his niece or nephew? Or ever see his family again? And Inga? Inga? I'm sorry. The footsteps halted outside the cell and the door screeched open. The footsteps approached hurriedly, pausing before the table. Steeling himself, Alton flicked his eyes open to glare at his captors. And was utterly shocked to see a dark-skinned girl standing before him. Her eyes were a deep molten brown, her hair shorn close against her scalp. A pair of scars were cut across her cheekbones and over her brows in a fine hand, long since healed over with raised edges. Her clothing was thin, nondescript. And at her collarbone, a curved S in the shape of a snake eating its own tail. The slave mark. Here. The girl whispered, holding a cup toward him. Her accent was strange, so thick that he almost didn't understand what she said. Drink this. It will help you feel better. Alton turned away, his already weak voice shaking from the tremors. No. You misunderstand. This is water, with some herbs to ease pain. I am a healer. A healer. Like Inga. How? Alton said through clenched teeth, the shaking nearly making it impossible to talk. How do I know you're not here to poison me? Because your life is not forfeit. Not yet, Master Alton. Don't call me that. Why not? She was quiet for a moment. Is that what your master Johann called you? Don't, Alton shouted, trying and failing to haul himself upward. Say his name. You and your people butchered him. I am sorry. You are right, except for one thing. Her expression darkened as she looked at the cup in her hand. They are not my people. I am enslaved here, forced to do their bidding. Such as making you drink this to make you feel better. Dropping back into the table, Alton scoffed. And why would they want that? Some of them don't. My master, however, wishes it. And which one is that? Master Viggo Grimborn. The one with the goatee and burn scars on his face and mismatched eyes. One calculating and dangerous, the other milky white with blindness. Alton frowned. Why would he want me healed? The girl frowned. He always has an angle. I trust there is something you have that he wants. Perhaps more information. Alton closed his eyes. I told them everything. No, you told them what they wanted to hear. You answered their questions. There is always more. My master wishes to know more if he has bargained for your life. Bargained for my life. Alton faced her and stared deep into her eyes. What's in the cup? I said water with. No. Tell me exactly what herbs are in there. She raised a scarred brow. Ginger, coriander, lemon, chamomile with honey. And a little whiskey. Despite himself and everything that had happened, he breathed a laugh. Just a little. She straightened. It takes off the edge. These herbs are good for fighting fever and infection. I know. Though the girl's expression was blank, he could see the surprise in her eyes. You know herbs. I thought you were a trader. Alton closed his eyes as another ache of pain rose up from his arms. Traders need to know the basics. And yet to know this much is not basic. How do you know this? Alton gritted his teeth. He didn't want to give her any information that she might pass on to her master. To Viggo. Sensing this, she lowered her voice. I am merely curious. It is not important. Stepping forward, she held out the cup. Alton met her eyes, not trusting that what she said was true. He could smell some of the herbs in the cup, especially the chamomile. The girl stared back at him, waiting. She didn't appear malicious. Honestly, she just looked like a girl. Perhaps 5 or so years older than him. Tall and straight-backed. Blinking, Alton took in her measure. She was a slave and yet there was a certain challenge about her. As if she was not weak. As if she had something to fight for. Suddenly he felt bad for snubbing her question. Maybe she was asking on Viggo's behalf. Or maybe she really was only curious. A truth for a truth. Alton whispered. You tell me something and I'll tell you. She scowled. My master likes to play games. I do not wish to play games with you. Okay. I understand that. Alton said firmly. But I'm a prisoner here, just as you are, right? I don't want to get you into trouble, but I want to get out of here. Maybe we can help each other. All this because I asked how you know the health properties of coriander. Alton blinked, stung. Then he noted the slight curve to her lips. A small, teasing smile. He sighed. You shouldn't tease a guy in duress. Perhaps if the guy in duress would drink his tonic he'd be in less duress and stop thinking of dreams of grandeur. Sighing, Alton raised his head. She gently set the cup to his lips and he drank it as best he could. The ginger and alcohol burned on the way down and it didn't taste great, but the chamomile and honey was soothing on his dry throat. When he'd drained the cup he lay back down, suddenly exhausted. There. That should help. I will return soon with a basket of cleaning materials. Your pain should have dulled by then so cleaning will be made easier. Alton nodded as she turned away. Wait. What's your name? She paused at the cell door. I am a slave. I have no name. Ridiculous. Everyone has a name. Maybe you can't use it, but you still have it. It's the one thing they couldn't take from you. What is it? She was silent for a long time. Zoe. It is Zoe. Alton nodded, his mind feeling slightly fuzzy. With nothing else in his system, he was already feeling the effects of the alcohol. Zoe, thank you. Even if you're just doing what you're told, thank you. Zoe gave him a small smile. The whiskey was my idea. Rest now. I will return. Alton watched her go, her footsteps swift and direct. He'd not met many slaves, and yet there was something about her. She had a spiritedness about her. Even if her life was not her own, she seemed to move as if she commanded it. Would she get in trouble with Viggo if he found out she'd given him whiskey? Or even talked to him? Maybe she didn't care. Stupid of him to try to get her to help him. He didn't know if he could trust her. For all he knew, she was bonded to Viggo in some way. If she'd perhaps been in Viggo's employ, for lack of a better word, for a long time. But no, she'd been disgusted at the idea that she should be lumped together with those evil men. Forced to do their bidding, yes, but not loyal to them. Chained, but not broken. The thought gave him courage. Even with his addled brains and throbbing injuries from head to toe, and though he knew nothing about her except her name, he felt his heart lift. He could do this. She couldn't protect him from whatever Viggo wanted or if Slaver Anton came back. But he wasn't broken. Not yet. The Sullivan house was a flurry of activity. Boxes were strewn throughout the house, all closed up tight for travel. Leather luggage bags were full to near bursting with the remainder of Genevieve's belongings. Most of her clothes had already been delivered to Burke one way or another, and the furniture she'd chosen to bring was in a neat stack by the door, awaiting pickup and delivery to the ships. Genevieve felt like her emotions were as frazzled as her hair. A big, tumultuous bush that refused to be soothed no matter how much she tried to tame it. As the days had been ticked off the calendar and deadlines approached, she felt her excitement for the big day beginning to wane. Well, not wane exactly. It was still there, of course. Beneath the frazzled chaos. Her brothers Ivan, Callan and Thuggery arrived and began hauling her dresser out the door and onto a cart outside. Outside her father Kiev laughed with her final brothers, Blair and John, while their mother Molly trilled throughout the upstairs. Genevieve's sisters had been by earlier that morning to assist with the final touches on packing, but as they each had multiple children by now, they had to hurry off to various engagements. It was just as well. The house was becoming much too crowded and loud with the endless noise. Genevieve could remember clearly when all of them had lived under this roof. She gazed lovingly at the hearth where her father would have them gather around to hear stories of Vikings long since dead, about wars with dragons and stories of heroes far across the sea who tamed them. All of the girls huddled together in their night dresses and slippers, the boys all brandishing grins and toy swords and swearing to one day be heroes, too. Ivan, with his calm and steadfast persona, had always been the same, even back then. She'd curled up into his lap and listened to her daddy's stories with rapt attention, her curly hair bushier then than it was now. Blinking, the memory disappeared when her brothers reappeared, grabbing the next pieces of furniture. It was strange how after all this time they were all still so close. There had been no shortage of spats in this house, especially with limited space. 11 people and 1 washroom. How had they all not murdered each other? There had been days when tempers had run as high as the volume and she'd wanted to shriek with frustration for wanting a little bit of freedom and space to call her own. And then they'd each moved out, one by one. First Ivan, then Lana, then Maven and Callan and Bree. All of them were married in short succession, considering their close age gaps. Blair and John had gotten a small house together before finding their own wives. Suddenly she was a blossoming teenager and she'd found herself with fewer companions, except Thuggery. He was a stalwart friend through and through, but even though Genevieve had wished away her siblings so that she might have more space and quiet, she quickly found out how much she missed them. Ivan's steady presence. Callan's music. Blair and John's tricks, particularly Blair's penchant for scaring people. Playing dress-up with Lana with her pretty dresses and jewelry. Drawing by the creek with Maven. Baking and tea with Bree. And of course, always followed by her parents' incessant bickering. Though it drove her mad as a child, as she grew up she found how much she loved it. It was a steady stream in the background, always sassy, always loving beneath the surface, and even funny at times. Her mother's firm hand and her father's stern brow were both impossibly fearful most times as she grew, especially as she longed to be free from their constraints. All those siblings who had gone before to new lives of their own except Thuggery, bless him and she the baby, still stuck at home to be coddled. They did their very best. She didn't fault them for worrying or having rules. Some things were still harder to swallow, but things had gotten better these last few years. Genevieve didn't think it was necessarily because of Finn, but she did think that his presence eased their mind considerably. Finn had been incredibly nervous that first holiday night he'd been trapped in these walls with her entire family. 8 siblings to impress was no easy feat, not to mention all of her nieces and nephews. She was quite sure he'd had less fear in his heart when speaking in front of hundreds at the convocation. He'd easily impressed her brothers. Alas, he was the son of one of those beloved heroes they'd grown up hearing tales about. They had a great camaraderie and had all become fast friends, which eased Finn's nerves and grown his confidence. Her sisters, though. Lana had promptly called him a brute and stalked away, her nose in the air. Maven and Bree had merely watched and probed him with questions, all in the effort of protecting their beloved baby sister's heart. Of course, Finn handled it all like a champ. He was still a little afraid of Lana, but, well, who wasn't? Genevieve smiled to herself as she climbed the stairs, passing doorways that had once been the entrances to her siblings' bedrooms. Ghostly memories of pillow fights and sneaking down the stairs for a cup of hot caramel apple cider in the middle of the night washed over her, but she pushed them away and went back to her mental list. Perhaps if she stopped focusing on memories, then she'd get more done. Besides, she needed to hurry. It was Finn's birthday and she needed to get to Burke before dusk. Turning down the hall she strode into her room to grab the final box propping the door open and froze. The room was empty. Save for a few pieces of furniture she'd chosen to leave behind, her bed as she'd be staying a few days longer, and a few shelves that couldn't be removed from the wall, everything was gone. Packed up and sitting downstairs, on a cart, or already packed away on the massive ship that would take her home. The word clanged through her. Home. And yet, this was home. Wasn't it? She reached out and ran her fingers along the bare wall beside the door that had once held a tapestry that Lana had made for her 5th birthday. Above that had been a shelf full of trinkets her brothers had brought home on their adventures. A glass of seashells from Braun, dragon scales from the east, even a jar of dried petals from their wives' bouquets at each of their weddings. Curse her for being a hopeless romantic, but she couldn't bear to see the flowers thrown away. As she stepped further into the room, her steps were loud claps against the wooden floor. With no rug or furniture or clothing to muffle the sound, it sounded as empty as it felt. She wanted to move to Berk. She wanted to marry Finn. Of course, she did. She'd wanted that more than anything for years. And yet it felt like she was cutting out a piece of herself. Her entire life had been spent on Jut. She'd been born here. Not so long ago she thought she might die here. And now she was leaving. Genevieve's eyes burned with sudden tears. Where did her childhood go? A few years ago she'd been so sad that all her older siblings had moved out and gotten married and left her alone. Now she was leaving them behind for her own life, far across the sea. Now she wouldn't get to see them whenever she wanted. She wouldn't see her nieces or nephews as often as she liked. The elderly people she'd come to know and love at the elders' home, all her friends, Hannah, all of them were staying here. And she was leaving. "Jen, dear," Molly said, her quick steps echoing down the hall before entering the room. "We have received a few more invitations despite the deadline for head counts being last Friday. You don't suppose we can squeeze a few more heads in the Great Hall, do you?" Genevieve wiped her face with a shaking hand and turned. As if her motherly instincts were on high alert, Molly looked up from the invitations in her hand. "Oh, Genevieve." Quickly covering her face, Genevieve burst into tears. Oh dear." Molly rushed forward and pulled her into a hug. "Jenny, it's all right." "I can know," Genevieve said through great heaves. "I just keep thinking about all the memories and now I feel awful for leaving because I won't see everyone." "Oh," Molly said with a small laugh and pulled her back. Her dark eyes were very bright. "Do not weep for what is not lost. You can see us anytime. We will all come to visit and you can come here anytime." Genevieve sniffed and looked around at her empty room, her lips trembling again. "It's all gone." "No. It's all packed away for your new life." Molly wiped a tear off her face and turned her chin back toward her. "This is good and right, General. I know it's hard and it can be scary. Change isn't easy. But it is not bad." A sudden prim smirk appeared on her face and she added in a low voice, "And you two wanted to get married 2 years ago." "Our mother." Genevieve huffed, but laughed all the same. Quickly wiping her face, she tried to ignore Molly's laugh. "I will pretend I didn't hear that." Laughter preceded the sudden gathering of tramping feet on the stairs and suddenly there was a crowd. All of Genevieve's brothers and her father strode into the room, apparently looking for more furniture. Ivan stopped first, and threw out his arms to block the others from moving closer. Let's go back outside." "Nice, it's empty," Thuggery said, slapping down his arm and walking in anyway. "Does this mean we're done?" "Thug, Jen and Mom are having a moment," Ivan hissed, pointing back to his side as if Thuggery were a 6-year-old child. Nonplussed, Thuggery said, "I'm having a moment, too. Right now, see." He paused. "And here's another one. And another. The day is just full of little moments, you see." Ivan huffed as Blair and John snickered behind him. Another figure appeared in the hall, but as he was shorter than all his sons, they could only hear a voice call over the din. "Molly. Is Jenny in there? I can't see through the forest of limbs." Molly huffed. "Don't you men have somewhere to be? We're here on your orders, Mom." "So ungrateful." "Yeah, where would you be without us?" "Your sister," as Ivan indicated, Molly said, her nostrils flaring, "is having a moment." Genevieve took a deep breath through her nose, her tears now dried on her face. "No, it's all right. How can I blubber about missing them 1 minute and then be upset they're here the next?" To her surprise, 5 sets of midnight brown eyes shot to hers and gave her sad, puppy dog eyes. General Callan reached out and tugged on her sleeve. He opened his arms for a hug, which she gratefully accepted. "We'll be here when you need us. And I'm sure we'll be around Berk, too. Yeah, when the time comes to beat Finn to pulp for treating our baby sister badly, you just send us a terror," Blair said, scooping her up the second Callan released her. The hulking brute was very tall, even by Finn's standards. She could barely touch the floor. Laughing, she said, "Well, I'm sure that won't be necessary." "Listen," John said firmly. He may be hard to take out, but collectively the Sullivan men can take turns and kick his butt in turn. Don't forget, Lana Thuggery said. She still hates him, remember? She doesn't hate him. Molly scolded. Lana just has painfully high standards. Thuggery offered. Genevieve's best interests at heart. Ivan corrected. That's what I said. Thuggery said vehemently, wrapping an arm around Genevieve's shoulders. Alas, what shall I do without you? Genevieve scoffed. You could get a ring on Helga's finger already and move to Berk. A collective "oh" echoed throughout the Sullivan house at that, accented with sputters and much blushing from Thuggery, laughter from Genevieve and Molly, and an indignant whine from Kiev still locked out in the hall. Genevieve looked around the room at her brothers, wishing for a moment her sisters were all here, too. But no, they were set to have lunch with the whole family soon. Sort of a Sullivan family brunch before she left for Berk for Finn's birthday. And in a few days. A thrill went through her chest. In a few days, they'd all be gathering in Berk for the wedding. She'd see them all very, very soon. They'd all be dressed in their finest, a difficult feat but one that would be accomplished if their wives and mother had anything to say about it. She'd miss them, all of her big brothers, but they were right. She'd see them all soon and she could see them anytime she wanted. After all, they were family. And family was forever, no matter the distance. A dozen mugs knocked together in a cheer, ale splashing over the sides as the group of friends toasted Fearless Finn and Adriana Haddock. The former sighed melodramatically and promptly stated it was about time he got the respect he deserved and grinned to the chorus of groans and scoffs. Adriana on the other hand gave a sheepish smile and pretended she wasn't half of the center of attention before sipping her lemon water. Come on, Anna. Thorin said for the third time, pounding a barrel of mead nearby. Just this once. I don't like alcohol, you should know this by now. But it's your 21st birthday. Helga chimed in, mead sloshing down the side of her cup as she brandished it toward her. You only get to be 21 once. Adriana rolled her eyes. And one sip of that grotesque liquid was good enough for a whole lifetime. Well sure, if you even want to call the watered-down liquid alcohol. Also, that was almost 3 years ago. You're telling me that you aren't at least a little curious? Nope. Adriana said flatly. It burns on the way down. I'm not sure why you all enjoy it. Helga and Thorin shrugged before pounding their mugs together once more. More for us. Exactly. Adriana said. Save the good stuff for those who will enjoy it. In the meantime, I will enjoy my life fully hydrated with no after effects. Hydration always has after effects, Annabeth. Cliff said shamelessly from a seat nearby. Which is why I'm always asking Eric and Finn to go pee, because when your bladder is empty, you're all around less stressed. Finn gagged on his mead from across the fire pit. Eric, on the other hand, flicked an imaginary piece of dust off his shoulder as if he'd heard nothing. Since when did you become so astute in bodily functions, Cliffy? Inga asked before sipping her wine. Since I joined the family, of course, my auntie is Mara, you know. Cliff said. And you never know, soon we might have 2 healers in the family. Inga's amusement vanished in a blink. Alton was still missing and Snotlout and the twins still hadn't returned. Leave it to Cliff to somehow forget this fact. Or perhaps he was trying to stay positive with the circumstances by bringing positivity into it. Either way, Inga's worry was unmistakable as she looked out across the ocean beyond the watchtower upon which they all stood. Adriana squeezed her arm but Inga quickly pulled away. I'm fine. My dad will be back soon and he'll tell me it was nothing. We're worrying for nothing. She narrowed her icy blue eyes on Cliff. And then we'll see who's peeing themselves with relief, Cliff. Ouch. I accept my fate. Good. Inga said primly before taking a seat and crossing her legs. Because I happen to know of a healer or two with some incontinence products, diaper baby. Down, girl. Thorin laughed nervously. I thought this was a party. There's no party without some Jorgensen sass. Finn said. Inga relaxed and gave an assertive nod. Too right. Adriana watched Inga's blue eyes dart to Tarin as she pressed her hand to her belly. You all right? Yes. Tarin huffed. I feel monstrous, that's all. And all this talk of bladders has reminded my son that he's sitting on mine and keeps kicking it. Cliff coughed something that sounded an awful lot like daughter, and Adriana smirked. No matter the gender of the baby, she had no doubts that they would be thrilled, but the sight of Cliff with a baby girl in his arms made her heart squeeze with all the cutesy feels. Finn sighed and stretched out his boots toward the fire. All this talk of bladders and babies makes me want to stay young forever. Here, here. Thorin and Evan said, raising their glasses. When are you two expecting? Adriana asked Evan, taking a seat beside Eric. Evan blinked, then his eyes widened. What? We're not, I mean, Morgan's not, I mean. I mean she could be, Inga said with a sly smile. No, she's not. Evan said firmly, staring down at her glass. Trust me, she's not. Well, where is she then? I told you guys, she's helping with decorations for the wedding. She's not homesick or anything. Home. Well, if you say so. Adriana said, settling into her chair with a sly smile. Troublemaker. Eric whispered. Only the best. Evan sighed and took a long drink. We're not ready for kids yet. That's what I said, Finn said. And yet we don't even have our rings on yet, and people keep asking when Jen is due. Well, yeah, you two are a bit. Finn's eyes flashed and Thorin bit his tongue promptly, but the smirk was still unmistakable. Care to finish that sentence, Mr. Taylor? Finn's head snapped up. Jenny. Hey, when did you get here? Genevieve had materialized out of nowhere, the golden firelight catching in her hair like golden sparks. She accepted Finn's hug and kissed his cheek before taking the seat beside him. A few minutes ago. I could barely get out of the saddle before we were accosted by Zap and Pepper. They're excited for the party to start. Finn said, throwing an arm around her shoulders as Eric handed her a drink from the drink table. How was packing? Genevieve took a sip and nodded. Good. Everything's packed up. I'll have to head back tomorrow to settle the last of everything, but... She gave a sheepish grin. I'm starting to run out of things to do. That's good, isn't it? Everyone nodded and grinned in agreement. So what's going on here? Well, Inga's a savage today and Morgan's definitely not pregnant. Despite the golden firelight on his face, Evan's blush was unmistakable. Thank you, Cliff. Ugh, I'm sorry, I'm stressed. Finn swirled the mead in his mug. Do you need to pee? Laughter echoed throughout the clearing as Cliff turned a raised brow on the air. How dare you use my lines against me? Tarin was positively cackling. Eric tapped his prosthetic against the fire, smirking broadly. We're learning how to best deal with you. It's kind of like parenting, you get better at it with time and much trial and error. Why is everyone hell-bent on teasing me today? Cliff demanded. Taste of your own medicine, Cliffy. Adriana said. Tell me, is it bittersweet or just bitter? Ugh. Cliff flopped into his seat and crossed his arms. I hate you guys. Now you don't. Now I don't. Genevieve unpursed her lips with a click of her tongue. So everyone's sassy today, okay. To be fair, there's a lot going on. Finn said. It's how we Burkians cope with stress. Ain't that the truth? Genevieve said, meeting his eyes and smiling. A week. A week and they'd be married, Adriana thought. Suddenly she was so excited, she felt like she'd burst. Can you two take the goo-goo eyes elsewhere? Inga sighed. Finn ignored her but Genevieve gave a shy smile and looked away, meeting Adriana's eye. Oh. Happy birthday. Oh God, she whipped to the side and noted Finn's slow blink. Happy birthday. Oh, sorry, babe. He shook his head, definitely amused, but clearly trying to feign annoyance. Forgot your own fiancé's birthday, I see how it is. I didn't forget, I just got distracted by everyone's antics. Hey. Whoa now. Antics, Cliff said, arms still crossed as he stared up at the stars. Is my middle name, after all. He snorted when Tarin slapped his thigh and rolled her eyes. Genevieve rolled her eyes. Anyway, what did you guys get for your birthday? Finn pursed his lips. Actually I don't know. My mom has a box wrapped but said it's really for the both of us, so I'm not sure yet. She wouldn't let me open it until you got here. Eric and Anna got us some embossed glasses though, so those are nice. You. I can't wait to see them. What about you, Anna? Well, Adriana glanced at Eric, who smiled. Eric got me a new necklace. She touched the new silver pendant around her throat with a small purple gemstone wrapped around a twist of silver. Oh, and some saddle oil. My parents got me some new fuzzy socks and a few books. And Darren gave me this. She reached into her pocket and held up a small purple and green piece of cloth in the shape of a butterfly. The edges were sewn down, which Eric obviously did as Darren couldn't possibly sew it himself. It was made of felt, soft to the touch and easy to keep in her pocket. It was so small and precious and sweet that she had no doubts that she'd carry it with her wherever she went for some time. A chorus of oaths echoed around the fire. That's so sweet. Genevieve said. He is so precious. He is. Adriana gazed down at it. Honestly, I thought he'd give me a rock or something, but this was definitely more special. I suspect someone gave him the idea. She promptly elbowed Eric in the ribs in a small jab. Everyone laughed but Eric shook his head. Nope, Darren thought of that. We were making a craft and he asked if we could make you a butterfly. Making it a gift for your birthday was my idea. Adriana beamed. Thank you. Folding the wings together, she gently slid it back into her pocket. Conversation turned back to the wedding, as it was prone to do. Finn and Genevieve took the questions in their stride. Adriana could tell they were both eager and excited as well as nervous. It wasn't long ago that she'd felt the exact same way. Smiling, she sat back in her seat and took Eric's hand. He gave an amused chuckle and pulled her in closer. She tried to stay focused on the conversation but she suddenly remembered they were going on a late-night flight. Darren was spending the night at Hiccup and Astrid's, so they had all the time in the world to fly and enjoy a night together. Though Eric's teal eyes flicked from one person to the other depending on who was talking, she could tell he was distracted. Without warning, he met her eyes and raised his brows. What? You're staring. Eric whispered. Oh. Grinning in amusement, he leaned into her ear and whispered, You say the word and off into the night we go. Adriana fought a grin. She was tempted to say they should go right away. She hadn't gone exploring with Eric on a late-night flight in ages. She was eager to explore and taste the open skies under cover of darkness. But the party had only just started and she hated to leave so soon. Besides, why not make him squirm a little bit? Turning her face toward his, she brushed her nose alongside his and whispered, Soon. Eric gave her a knowing smirk. Oh, he knew exactly what was going on, and he surely didn't like to be teased. Not in present company when he could do nothing anyway. A sharp cough sounded. Gee, the stars are sure shining bright tonight. Eric ignored Cliff and everyone else's nervous laughter, his eyes taking in the features of her face like a thief in the night. Yes, she is. Adriana grinned and looked away before shaking her head, trying to clear her head and ignore their friends' knowing smirks. Still, she wasn't quite sure she realized what she'd gotten herself into in teasing him. After all, Eric was very good at putting on a mask and returning to normal conversation as if he'd forgotten their little flirtation, and yet the fingers he twisted into her hair at the nape of her neck said otherwise. A game then, to see who could survive this party the longest. She said they could leave soon and he left the decision up to her, but how long could either of them hold out? After all, both of them were fairly stubborn. Adriana fought a smirk and ran a finger across his ribs beneath her crossed arms pressed into his side. He stiffened and trailed a finger across her neck beneath her hair in a long slow sweep. It took nearly all her willpower to not shiver. She was grateful for Cliff's next joke that forced everyone into laughter, distracting them from anything she might have done. Such as smoothing a hand down the length of his leg and returning her hand back to her lap before anyone noticed. Eric gave her a swift sidewise glance at her daring. A dimple appeared in his left cheek. Adriana bit her lip against a laugh and stubbornly forced it down, down, down. This was escalating too quickly. They were nearly giggling like a pair of 16-year-olds. His thumb slid up the length of her neck and pressed down into the muscle, sending small sparks down her spine. Adriana inhaled in surprise, drawing Evan's attention at her side. She quickly cleared her throat and Eric's hand casually slid back to her shoulder. Adriana didn't look at Evan, but she was quite sure that he knew exactly what was going on, seeing as he muttered something about filling his mug and disappeared seconds later. Eric dissolved into snickers. "Gods, would you stop?" "Me? I'm not doing anything." Adriana hissed in as dignified a manner as possible as his laughter caught a few others' attention. "What are you two laughing at?" "Nothing." Eric tried to wipe his face clean of amusement but was clearly struggling. "I'm filling my mug, too." He quickly snatched it up and disappeared to the drink table where Evan was standing, staring out at the ocean. Adriana watched him go and watched as they exchanged a few quiet words. Though she couldn't see their faces, it appeared Evan was giving Eric an awkward side-eye and he gave an uncaring shrug. Swallowing, she faced the fire again and found everyone staring at her with knowing smirks. "What?" "You know," Helga said, swirling her mead. "I may not be married, but I know of a few broom closets nearby." "Helga!" Finn cried in shock as Genevieve's eyes went wide. "What?" "I mean, if you're going to feel each other up, do it somewhere else. If you must celebrate the birthday in a certain fashion, do it without an audience, I say." Adriana was quite sure she'd never blushed harder in her life. I don't know what you're talking about." "Just own it, girl. You think you're subtle, but everyone knows Evan gets squirmy around PDA." "Shut up, Helga," Evan said from the drink buffet. Helga raised her mug at his back and gave Adriana a not-so-subtle wink. Not to be outdone, Adriana cleared her throat. "So Helga, how are you and Thuggery doing?" Helga's smile tightened. "Who's Thuggery?" Finn's brows shot upward above his mug. "And you had to ask." Thorin mumbled and took a drink himself. "Wait," Genevieve said, voice full of surprise. "Did you break up?" Helga picked an imaginary hair off her mug and flicked it into the abyss. "Something like that." Adriana felt instantly horrible. "I'm sorry. If I knew I wouldn't have said anything." Helga snorted and waved a hand, but she didn't quite meet anyone's eye. "It's fine. It's not like we told anyone." Finn's blue eyes were hard on her. "When did this happen?" Helga didn't reply. Apparently only Thorin knew any details and he kept his expression firmly blank. Still, Helga wasn't bothered by most things. At least that was the facade she put on. Perhaps it said something that she had so very little to say. That she wasn't waving away any insecurities with a grin sharper than her knives. Then, as if forcing herself to spit the words out, Helga said, "He proposed the other day." The crackling of burning wood and ocean waves crashing into the beach far below were the sounds for a long, long moment. And then it broke with a series of shocked questions. "Wait, Thuggery proposed?" Genevieve demanded in a shrill voice. "My Thuggery? Hang on. Hear that right?" Helga took all the outbursts in silence, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. "What did you tell him?" "Well, obviously I said no." Her words cut through the din and everyone went silent once more. "As if I'd ever be a wife." Helga scoffed and stared out at the ocean, ignoring their eyes. Her next words were softer. "He deserves better. With someone who wants to settle down and have kids and all that stuff." "Oh Helga, you could be that person though," Genevieve said. Helga shook her head. "See, this is why I didn't want to tell anyone, because you'd try to convince me otherwise." "Well, what you want is important," Adriana said firmly. "If you genuinely don't want to get married or have a family someday, that's all right. No one said you have to do those things." The frustration in Helga's eyes dimmed. "Thank you." Finn, however, was not to be deterred. "You could be though. Anna raises a valid point, but you wouldn't have to give up everything you love to be with him. You can still do everything you do now. Putting a ring on your finger doesn't change that. Thuggery would never make you change. We're too similar." Helga recited, as if she'd been telling herself this for hours. Two loud, obnoxious warriors busy with protecting their own islands would never make it work. Thorin shook his head and sighed. "I told you already you're taking the wrong approach on this." One of us would have to move to the other island if we were to really make it work. Helga fired back. He's already well established on Jut and I've already set down roots here working for Finn, so I'm not going anywhere. I can't expect him to move here. Did you ask him? Genevieve asked softly. Because I think if he asked you to marry him, he'd. What? Helga demanded. Think through all the scenarios. All the consequences. No, he asked me in the heat of the moment. Thuggery doesn't think through all the scenarios. He leads with his heart and not his head, and that would only take us crazy places. But are you saying no because you don't want to get married? Finn asked.